Hey everybody, just a quick reminder before we get the episode going that your support means a great deal to me. If you are able to support the channel financially, please do go to 10percenttrue.com, hit subscribe and pick one of the packages. For £5, $6.50 a month, you get early access and ad-free access to my content. And for a little bit more than even that, you also get access to AMA and private Q&A sessions that are run directly with my guests through Zoom call at least once a quarter, probably more often than that. I'd appreciate your support. Anyway, let's get on with the episode.
I had one night where we were doing, there was a shadow, I forget what the title was, but this guy was basically a shadow governor of a province. He was kind of the ISIS shadow governor of a province of northern Iraq that was certainly giving us a bunch of grief. And was this is when the Iraqis were actively attempting to regain regional security in that sector. And this guy was continuing to operate effectively. And so he was continuing to coordinate his forces. And what was so interesting is we had an element of that kind of human network centric activity that said, well, we can see into the money stream a little bit more. We don't know who this individual is. We're not positive where this individual is, but we can see into the money stream. And we're going to inject essentially extra money. It wasn't like shut the money down. It wasn't take it away. It was we're going to inject extra money into this stream and see what happens. And within about a day and a half, that guy was dead from basically all of his, those peers of his that could see the money activity. And all of a sudden he had more than he should have. They probably thought that he was corrupt or that he was on the take or he was skimming something. And it was another really interesting way of targeting. You're like, okay, I was looking for, let's find this guy's house so we can put a piece of ordnance into it. And they were looking at it like, how do we discredit him in a way that makes it dangerous for him to be around his peer group?
Maestro, welcome to 10% True. It's great to see you.
It's good to be here, Steve.
Maestro, so you're one of these guests that it's taken a long time to get to the point from where we initially started talking to the point where you're on the channel. I think it's about 6 or 7 months, something like that.
That's right.
I should say Star Baby Pachuca introduced us. So thank you to Star Baby for making that introduction. And if you happen to have, Maestro, any story about Star Baby or even Sting official that you could tell at some point in this conversation, then feel free to drop it in there. So
We'll make every effort.
thank you. So I referenced Sting official because we are in a very unique situation today where we're going to talk about your deployment to Syria. You were a Strike Eagle guy. You're going to introduce yourself in a minute. But you flew Strike Eagles and you were the squadron boss of the unit that deployed. And Stingel was a member of that squadron. And he came on the channel about 2 or 3 years ago and talked about that deployment. And he talked about, in particular, shooting down the Iranian drone. And of course, you were the pilot for that particular sortie. So we're going to get to that. So that's kind of interesting. But one of the things that we're hoping to do, just for the benefit of the audience, so they can understand, is instead of just repeating the same sort of stories as I had when I talked to Stinger, you've got some very important experience, some very unique experience again around the planning side of things, having worked in the CAOC at Audid. And so we're going to cover off that as well. So we're going to have hopefully talking about the same sort of events that I did with Stinger, but from a different perspective and with a different lens applied to it. So that's the plan for today. But I just wanted to say to the audience at home, if you're looking for a good podcast to listen to, go and pick up or get a subscription to Safe on Deck. I say subscription, it sounds like you have to buy it. You don't. Safe on Deck podcast is by Antonio Gemamore. He's a Navy pilot, or he's just retired actually from the Navy, but he was a Navy pilot. Good friend of mine, and he runs an excellent podcast, Safe on Deck. I'll put a link in the description, but please subscribe to him. He's on YouTube and all the usual podcasting platforms. And he's an excellent interviewer, a man after my own heart, because he asks questions and then he stops talking and listens to the person while they respond. All right. Okay. So that was a plug for somebody else, which is unusual. Maestro, just give us a quick introduction then. Who are you? Where do you come from? I'm assuming you're now retired. What was your Air Force career like? Give us a sort of a 2 or 3 minute précis of what it looked like.
That's right. I appreciate it, Steve. I just wrapped up very recently. So in December, I culminated a 24 and a half year Air Force career, graduated out of the Air Force Academy in 2000. Shortly after that, I got lucky enough to get picked up with Euronator Joint Jet pilot training at Shepherd Air Force Base, Texas, tracked on to fighters, was lucky enough to graduate well enough to get an F-15E, which was the kind of the hottest jet you could get at the time. The F-22 really hadn't started hitting young guy access out of pilot training yet. So got that, and then world events dictate that it was going to be an Iraq and Afghanistan early part of my career. Did that multiple times, so about 3 deployments to Iraq or Afghanistan and Inherent Resolve and Enduring Freedom until about 2009, where I transitioned over to getting picked up to go to the weapons school in 2007 and then teach at the weapons school in Nevada from 2009 to 2011. After that, your Air Force career takes that more diversified track of a couple of staff jobs where you kind of do the supporting activities for the organization training and equipping of your service. But then I was lucky enough to get a chance to go back as a director of operations and ultimately the squadron commander of the 492nd based in RAF Lakenheath, England, and take Strike Eagles back down to Iraq in 2017 for my last combat deployment in the F-15. Following that, I had a little bit more staff time. I got to help General Raymond's team stand up Space Force from the headquarters perspective in Washington, D.C. And then my last the last job that was really close to my heart was being the deputy commander of the 379th Air Expeditionary Wing at Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia, and then doing a little bit of time in OSD policy on the international security affairs side. The other connection that I hope that we'll go back to is one of those staff jobs where I was kind of doing the organization training and equipping. I apparently did it so well that they found me quite dispensable to leave from headquarters Air Force in Washington, D.C. and go to the Middle East for a year in a non-flying capacity, where I would specifically go to serve as the AFCENT, the Air Force Central Command Service Component Commanders, Weapons and Tactics Officers. So his A3TW patch, I'm a weapons officer, so I was one of the patch officers over there. And when I arrived, we were mopping up the tail end of Operation Iraqi Freedom. Enduring Freedom was in a little bit of a steady state operation in Afghanistan. We knew that there was a problem in Syria with this group that was calling itself ISIS, but the national security community hadn't really geared up to deal with it yet. But by the late spring, early summer, obviously they were kind of unleashing themselves across our erstwhile allies in Iraq and hurting American citizens and hurting coalition citizens in the process. So it was time to do something quickly, and I got to be a part of all the really rapid planning reactions to make sure that we were giving the president and giving our allies options to deal with ISIS. So that was April 2014 to April 2015. And a lot of that would flavor how my last combat deployment in the Strike Eagle would really play out.
That's quite an accomplished career, isn't it? That's very interesting.
It's been fun. Every bit of it's been fun, and I've been around great people. Stinger, Star Baby, and many others included.
So, and you helped stand up. Did you say Space Force or Space Command?
Space Force.
Space Force. Yeah.
I want to stake an appropriately modest claim on that. I was at Air Combat Command working for General Holmes. I was actually within the A3 Directorate, and I got basically a tap of, hey, Space Force is standing up. President's made a decision. Would you consider taking your family to Washington, D.C., and then spending some time assisting them? It wasn't that I'm particularly special. It was that they just needed people of my grade and experience to help out. I never was a guardian. I didn't switch over formally, but in many ways, I will tell you, I was so proud to help them, because space really is the next frontier that matters. And we talk about air control, we talk about sea control, and we are absolutely in an environment where you have to talk about space control. So I was very proud to help General Raymond's team move that ball, and I was lucky enough to be on what was called his SIG, his Strategic Initiatives Group. So it was kind of direct support to him as Chief of Space Operations.
That's very interesting. I wonder if I can get you. Wonder if I can get you back to. Can you talk about your Space Force stuff? Is it something that you?
There are elements I'm sure I can go into.
Okay.
Yeah.
There might be one that we should plan for the future. Yeah, I've
Yeah.
heard some very interesting things about Space Force, and in particular around sort of multi-domain warfare. How you might go in and, let's say, strike a target, and you want certain things to happen around that target, and space is the answer to making those things happen. So
it often is.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Okay, but that's definitely a rabbit warren that we should not go down now, because otherwise we won't get to talk about the CAOC in Syria. So it's
There.
really, really interesting to hear you say then you did this sort of, 1-2 year stint in the CAOC. I'm calling it a CAOC. Is it an AOC or a CAOC? Is it Combined Air Operations?
Yeah, it is. It's so the root word there is the Air Operations Center.
Okay.
If it's joint, it's a JOC. We very rarely have joint without coalition though. So since it's coalition as well, we have the cooperating members who are doing at the time counter Afghanistan work or sorry, counter Taliban work, early days, counter violent extremist work. And it's sort of continue to be, because I don't think it will ever not be CAOC. We'll always have the Royal Air Force there. We'll always have other members of the French Air Force, the Italian Air Force to coordinate with, etc. So
Yeah.
it's a CAOC.
So you had this experience where you were sort of sitting in that environment doing the planning for missions, and then you took over the 492nd Fighter Squadron and then went into combat with the unit. That's what you did.
That's right.
What were your observations then? So tell us a bit about CAOC. Tell us a bit about the sorts of things that you were doing. I know that you're limited. There are some things you
Sure.
can't put detail to, but what were your experiences there that were then germane for when you became the squadron boss at the BOAs and took them to combat?
Yeah, absolutely. The CAOC is, as you can easily imagine, it's an organization with a huge set of responsibilities, right? So briefly, by way of understanding how it locates within the overall chain of command, Central Command, U.S. Central Command, which has responsibility for essentially Egypt through to the eastern edge of Afghanistan, up into the stands of Central Europe. That geographic component command has underneath it the service component command. So the air, the land, the naval service components have a component command to orchestrate those forces that predominantly operate in that domain. So underneath Central Command, you have AFCENT, which is Air Force's Central Command, and they orchestrate the air operations. So fighters that are going to be launched off of the carrier strike groups are going to fall onto the air tasking order of the Air Force's Central Command, so that the Combined Forces Air Component Commander, colloquially the CFAC or Chariot, depending on which word you're using for them, that call sign then is really the one who's authoritative. Okay, the 4-star CENTCOM commander delegates authority for air operations down to the CFAC, and the CFAC produces the orders by which all the air players operate. There's a CIFMIC for all the maritime. There's a CIFLIC for all the land components, but my experience is primarily working for the CFAC. The 609th Air Operations Center, which is the AOC that's at a U.S. air base in the Middle East, from which we do all that operation of the air fight within the Central Command AOR. It's a huge organization. I can't give you the exact number. I want to say it was probably about, I'm going to guess, probably about 1,000 people working on, multiple shifts to keep 24/7 operations. And it's everything from, are we doing the intelligence analysis of what's really going on within either violent extremist groups or Taliban or whatever the era of conflict is, all the way through to, are we getting the right people with the right skill sets into theater? Are we planning and orchestrating the air operations? And are we sustaining, connecting and communicating them correctly? It's an enormous enterprise. What was interesting about it was AOC's, there's a really great book by an American author named Graham Allison called The Essence of Decision. And within this book, he talks about the Cuban Missile Crisis. And he's looking largely at the Department of Defense. And he identifies that when crisis actions occur, things that come at the organization, they're really coming out of left field. What are the mechanisms by which a large organization, 1,000 people working 24/7 operations, under anybody who's worked at AFCENT would tell you it's constant crisis operations, because you're always moving from one problem to the next. When that happens and these really unexpected events occur, the organization takes a little bit of time to wrap its mind around that. And initially, it will do what it does well in response to that. So sometimes what it does well is not really optimized to handling the problem of the moment. So as a great for instance when ISIS went from being okay, intel is telling us there's this extremist organization that's welling up within Syria as the Syrian civil war is kind of continuing to go and is creating ungoverned spaces. They're filling a little bit of the gap there on the north and east side of the Euphrates River. All of a sudden, when they now are surging their forces in through Haditha, Iraq, and in through Mosul, Iraq, the organization kind of is going to take a little bit of time to figure out what it actually wants to do. And in those times, what it's going to do is turn to the shelf and pull, the pre-approved plan off the shelf and begin assigning that for action, whether or not that was really the most right thing it could do at the moment or not. So there was a lot of insight that gave as far as, okay, when crisis actions occur, you can anticipate that the organization is taking a little bit of time to scurry around and go, okay, what do we really want to do? What do we actually know? What previously given commanders' guidance that's already been given to us, could we adapt or modify against this unique situation, which is not really what we've been told to do, but we do have to do something about it. So you can kind of anticipate the system. Oh, sorry, let me get a little bit more light. You can kind of anticipate the system undergoing that internal conundrum of what are we really supposed to be doing here? And then it begins generating options. So, for instance, we had to support an initial outset once the president had decided that, yep, the Iraqi people are under direct threat. The Syrian people are under enormous threat from ISIS. And I think it's worth explaining, these were bad hombres, man. The intel that we started pulling out was that these ISIS had started to demonstrate a level of brutality that was just beyond shocking. The beheadings, the public executions, mass executions, etc. So we had to do something, but it took time for the system to really wrap its mind around that and then to begin doing things. And within that, at first, the whole organization isn't going to come with you and just rapidly adapt, right? So in May of 2014, it was really interesting when the boss is coming down from the CFAC is coming down from his central offices where he's interacting with Central Command. He's getting national security briefings that are occurring at the highest level, and he's really asking for options. And you have to put together a streamlined team that goes, okay, first things first. Can we affect their ability to continue driving heavy artillery towards Mosul? Where are they getting these, up-armored Humvees from? Where are they getting these vehicles that they're optimizing for assault activities and that are really putting the Iraqis on their back foot? Where are they getting them from? Where are they located out? Can we attack them? So there was a lot there, and it was interesting because what Stinger got to see in the cockpit in June 2017 was he got to see what the operator feels at the far end of it, which is that moment of hesitation of the organization not really knowing what to do. What I got to see before that is watching the organization try to come to grips with, this is not on the script. We did not know that this was coming at us, and we did not have a contingency plan for this, and this does not match what the boss told us to do. So we're going to take a moment and come up with things. But the operator who's on the pointy end of that, you don't have the luxury of that delay. You just have to know, okay, what's right, what's legal, what's moral, and you have to sometimes improvise with those as your guiding principles. So the CAOC was a very interesting place to work to see, man, when they understand what they're doing, you got 1,000 people lined up behind that, you can bring an enormous amount of brain power to bear. When the plan deviates, you have the opportunity for now camps of different perspectives starting to pull the problem solvers in different directions. And my experience with that was dealing with Carrier Air Wing 8, who was having to generate forces while I was at the CAOC, and I've got the CAG, the Carrier Air Group command staff calling up and being like, you have got to make clear for my guys what we have to do. So Major Renken is now going to try to do the best interpretation we can, consistent with the general's orders, to make things simple and clear, because their operators, they can't interpret page 7 of paragraph 4 of, this guidance of what you should be doing. They need, hey man, can you make that binary? Is this yes or is this no? and you have to figure out how to make that a yes or a no for somebody. So that was a lot of what watching the CAOC, when crisis action, when things depart from the script, getting to anticipate, okay, the system's going to stall on this for a little bit, but the pace of what the operator sees can never slow down. You don't have that luxury. So we have to figure out how you continue to operate with or without. Steve, because it's going to connect to something else that you wanted to talk about, I think. As a commander, one of the things that I really believed in 2017 was I wanted to give our guys really simple and succinct guidance in short statements that they could hang their hat on and go, that's guidance that I can flexibly apply. The idea for that really came from a bunch of older heads who kept on telling me, you can't ever expect the bosses to give you detailed, specific, clear guidance for every situation. You have to train guys and gals what to do flexibly, consistent with kind of guiding principles. So I had as a big sign, for instance, if you are offensive and there's a doubt, there is no doubt. You take your finger off the pickle button, you're going to withhold that shot till doubt is resolved and you have clarity on the situation. If you have the opposite and you are defending folks on the ground who are counting on you as the reason why they're not going to go home in injured or with KIA on their team, then you signed up to be tried by 12, so they won't be carried by 6. That's a responsibility that you will, after the fact, make sure that you did things right, but in the moment, you will make sure they are not carried by 6. And that guidance was actually, it was simple enough, and it's not specific to any situation, but guys could apply it and go, okay, I'm offensive, I can take a pause here. They're defensive, I cannot take a pause here. I have to keep pressing this until they're not defensive anymore. So that was sometimes the kind of, rather than specific guidance, the way we gave guidance to a mindset rather than guidance to specific actions.
That's very interesting. I think my recollection from when Singer was talking about it was that, I mean, and we'll get into it. We don't have to get into it now, but he was talking about how those guys were defensive and you guys wanted to go kinetic, and the ABCCC, whoever it was saying to we're going to try some jamming or whatever. But we can talk about that in a bit. Let me take you back, Maestro, just to the CAOC. Then it's really interesting to hear you say that you were a weapons school guy and then you were an instructor at weapons school. One of the things that I think is reasonably well known with regards to sort of the planning of wars, let's say from a US military point of view, from Desert Storm onwards, was John Warden's concentric circles, the idea that you would, you don't necessarily go after the warfighting capability, you go after the leadership, you go after their ability to communicate, you go after their ability to detect you guys. So you and then you go after the the government or the people or the organizational structures that enable them to be in power. So, but now you're talking then about a bunch of guys, as you describe, brutal and uncompromising in the way they're going about business, but they don't live within, or do they? Do they live within the same world? And so the question really I'm asking you is, coming from the weapons school background you had you been taught about how to plan campaigns against asymmetric forces, or is weapons school not about that? It's about the aeroplane. What kind of background did you have then that let you say, okay, well, the CAOC's behind the power curve on this because things have changed. We're planning for a different type of situation, and now we need to be presenting CFAC with some options. So where did that knowledge and skill and experience and sort of wisdom come from?
I think that it's an attribute of the generation that I was part of, that we consistently faced situations that weren't to plan, right? How the 2003, the fact of 9/11, right? That wasn't exactly to plan. We didn't necessarily anticipate that. Having to go prosecute a campaign against a terrorist organization like Al Qaeda that was being aided and abetted by kind of a extremist organization like the government under the Taliban, that wasn't exactly planned out. So as a young guy, 2003, my first fighter squadron in the Panthers, while we're in between arriving in the squadron and getting ready to go out the door for what we think is going to be the first push into Iraq, I'm lucky enough to be mentored by guys like Spliff Russell, who was one of the guys who was, trying to keep alive SEALs on top of, snow-covered ridges in really awful events in Afghanistan. So hearing about, hey man, the Strike Eagle is never going to strafe. That was kind of a mantra during the FTU, or we'll teach you how to do it as a qual only event. But no. Actually, we're going to need you to do that danger close at 9,000 feet of altitude on the top of a mountainside. I would say that our generation was consistently confronted with, well, that didn't go exactly to plan. Whether it was strafing forces in danger close contact ranges in Afghanistan, whether it was, yes, I think we all anticipated American military might was very quickly going to unpackage the Iraqi military in 2003. What we didn't anticipate was, the emergence of the Fedayeen and the ongoing insurgency that would occur after that. And we had to adapt to that. We had to adapt to targeting pods that were used to, hey, scan for the correct building or identify the appropriate aircraft or naval ship to attack. But now I need you to figure out how to scan roads and see if you can find a van stopping people getting out and digging an IED into the side of a road or under a culvert. So all of the airmen who were doing that mission, to include the soldiers, sailors, the Marines, who were doing the mission in those kinds of contexts where it didn't go exactly to plan, generationally had to learn to be very adaptive. I think what weapons school does is it takes that to the next high level where it says, now we're going to reimpose, you were being adapted with an adversary who is a challenge because they're bearing IEDs, and that's not exactly what you were trained for. And then weapons school says, I'm going to take that and I'm going to now remarry it with full conventional force capabilities. So you have to deal with that while you're under direct peer levels of threat. With all of that, you learn to be very mentally resilient. You learn to really consider any potential solution, avenue towards a solution to your problem set. But I would say that specifically as it relates to what we saw by the time 2015, and we're trying to unpackage the Syria problem, was we really had to get used to, okay, what does it mean when I'm going to have Syrian fighters that I'm not really at war with, that are close in the vicinity of, or Syrian surface-to-air missile defenses that aren't necessarily directly targeting me because they know we're trying to stop ISIS, but we're in the vicinity of it. So how do we now design tactics that allow me to be to at least manage my escalatory profile, that allow me to turn it up or turn it down when I need to, that allow me to do things like headbutting that degrade their ability to operate in an area, but without crossing escalation thresholds that are really irreversible. I would say that our generation was constantly gifted opportunities to innovate and adapt to unexpected circumstances. And that's something that I think that was a unique thing that we saw quite a bit of. It was frustrating at times because you go, man, how are our tactics so bad at anticipating this potential? But the same thing that always happens is you start calling around to your weapons school buddies and, hey, what are you seeing? Did this happen to you? Did the Syrians try this with you? Oh, they tried it with you? Okay, call another unit. Did they try this with you? Yeah, they did it exactly that way, what the other guy described. Okay, now we have a consistent indicator. We have a consistent profile of what they're doing. Now we can begin developing a TTP against it. And rather than, we'd all love it to be top down, like somebody hands you, hey, this is the plan, do it this way. But I think that that's a pleasant fiction. What's really going to happen is you're going to go up the chain. You're going to say, hey, boss, you're not quite aware that this problem is occurring yet, but we've already talked about it among the patch community, among the instructor community, among just the community of aviators, and we're proposing the solution. This is what we're going to do, and we'd like your input if you have real heartburn with us doing it this way. So that's kind of the way it more realistically occurs. It was a cool thing at the CAOC then, because as the A3TW weapons and tactics, so it's kind of the patch for AFCENT, coordinating across and then telling guys like, hey, if you think this is the solution, I will take that up to General, at the time, Lofgren, the DCFAC, and General Hesterman, the CFAC. I will take that up and see if we can get that approved, or I'll talk to our judge advocate and make sure that that's consistent and legal in accordance with our ROE, or I'll talk to the other services and make sure that that's something that they could mirror. So the patch is not only a problem-solving school, but it's also a network. And we did a lot of that so that we could take problems and solutions up rather than identify problems and then wait for solutions to come down. That loop I haven't seen close that many times.
Hey everybody, it's Steve, sponsoring myself. Hey, if you'd like to support 10% True, I'd really appreciate it. You can visit 10percenttrue.com and take a look at the shop page. There's patches and stickers and shirts and things on there. But more importantly, there's my books, including this one, Be Afraid of the Dark, Strike Eagle Story Part 1. That is currently taking pre-orders. It's going to ship in September of 2025. If it's already September 2025, or that's in the past, then please go and grab a copy. I'll send it out to you ASAP. Many thanks for your support. Can you describe a little, Maestro, about how you promulgate that information then? So I suppose as an outsider looking in, I think CAOC and I think the FRAG, I think, I'm thinking a printout because I'm old of orders. Here's some targets, you go and strike. And then, here's the coordination. Here's the other players that are going to be in the strike package, whatever. And I suppose what I never really thought about was the fact that actually you would be designing, building tactics and TTPs as you described on the fly. So so you're a patch wearer, you're qualified to do that. You're going to your boss with a solution rather than a problem. That all makes sense. And having then been on both sides, then as somebody who went to war as the squadron boss, how does that get promulgated then? Do you say in a piece of paper or an email or whatever, oh, well, here's a new tactic and this is what you do, and there are some drawings on it? Or do you just say, this is what I'm thinking, but you guys are on the ground, so you figure it out yourselves? What does it actually look like to do that?
It can be exactly that simple. It really can. I'll give you a great for instance. We were going to kick off operations in areas that we didn't have a lot of air operations going into previously. For instance, southern Syria and eastern Syria, right? We're going to be going into areas that are a little bit new. We know that there's the potential for combat search and rescue coverage to get out and cover for it. But in the really early days, for instance, with ISIS, who exactly is part of a named operation? The politicals have to have the time. Ministers of defense have to decide: are we or are we not part of a coalition? Are we or are we not going to do this under an expansion of our existing missions, or are we going to require new political authorizations to do this? There is an initial reaction, and I don't want to downplay when I say that sometimes the system takes time to react. I don't want to downplay that there's legitimate political level decisions that need to be played out. And they want to know that things like, well, if my forces have to bail out, there's going to be search and rescue opportunity, and the aircraft that are overhead are going to be able to defend them with lethal force in the exact same way that I am counting on them being defended under today's operations. I want to know that we're going to get that before I'm going to get you to yes. But we were in new areas, as a for instance. We had to, what do you do? Like, this isn't 2003 where an Iraqi BMP is going to roll up and maybe, start engaging your downed tornado pilot or something like that. This is or Eurofighter pilot. This is different. This is the ISIS. They're going to drive maybe a Toyota pickup truck, maybe a Nissan van up to your guy. Maybe they're going to have something that looks reasonably like a uniform. Like maybe they'll wear the black headscarf, but probably they won't. How are you going to identify it? So we got together with a bunch of the patches, and we said, what can they do? They could detain, they could engage with weapons, they could transport, and if they transport to a place that we have a hard time rescuing, it's going to make our job of getting them out really difficult. So kind of look around the table and, hey guys, what does it mean to detain? Well, this is what I think it would mean. What does it mean to engage? Well, these kinds of weapons, or if they're obviously engaging with weapons. What does it mean to transport? They can throw me in the trunk of a car. They can transport me. So once we had all that kind of identified, then you can develop your tactic of, this is when an aircrew can transition from just doing presence and armed overwatch to we are advising the bosses, you have to let your aircrew do protection by collective self-defense. Because if we can do this, we can reassure their military leadership, and hopefully through them, their political leadership, that you're not going to then contribute to the problem of, military hostages being abused, or like the Jordanian pilot was, right? We all want to avoid that situation. We want to make sure that we don't create an impossible situation for the military or political leadership. So we wanted to find tactics that allow us to actually do things to keep guys away from those kinds of awful circumstances. And it was nothing more in that case than calling around, and we would do we had a regular battle rhythm of engagements with all the other patches from the CAOC down to all the units. And that wasn't just the fighter units, that was the tanker units, that was the command and control squadrons, that was the intel squadrons, the MQ-9 squadrons, which were the Reaper Predator squadrons, which were a huge asset. And we would go like, what does it look like? So we could collect the information and kind of rapidly tiger team that thing. I'm sure we should have taken weeks and, tasked the intelligence community exactly what would they do and how would they come back with it. But in several cases, it was, the CFAC coming down and saying the CENTCOM wants to do X. They want to operate in this new area. And they need us to reassure the coalition and the nations who are thinking about becoming coalition members that if one of their air crew goes down, we can defend them. Come up with a way that we're going to do it. Go. And you usually had like 24 hours, maybe 36 hours, maybe 2 periods of darkness before you had to start flying under those procedures. Wow. So especially in the early days when we were doing large strike packages, initially against ISIS, we would have mass briefings, and everybody was on, the Hollywood squares of the SVTC, from the carrier strike group down to bomber squadrons that were coming in from over the horizon. And we would go through, this is exactly what you're going to see, and when you can use these tactics, and when you have to transition to doing this. And we had to do it at that tempo so that we could, again, create options. Because we all knew that, man, if some nation has a pilot that gets burned in a cage, the participation of that nation is significantly in question. Mm-hmm. So we have to avoid that while continuing a tempo of operations that allows us to keep ISIS continuously on their back foot. That was a tough one. Another one, if you don't mind me sharing, was we had ISIS that were doing all kinds of crazy vehicles in these fights. A good example that we kind of started to figure out was, okay, their access to regular, gasoline, diesel fuel, things like that, we couldn't figure out where they were getting it from until we sort of started tracking down that they were essentially burning oil in barrels, because they would take over oil heads. They would burn it and make this like really simply refined, really low quality, really low octane gasoline. And they could run it, but they could only run it in a couple of different types of engines. I will say Hyundais are amazing. They can run on a really wide array of fuels, apparently. But we had to figure out, like, okay, is the reason they're not throwing an up-armored Humvee because they're broken, because they're damaged, because they can't run these things, or because they're out of gas? And if they're out of gas, why are they still running these little, kind of homemade vehicles? And it was really because I had an awesome intel captain, and she just kind of dug into the problem and exactly what are we doing, and traced the arc of it, and was like, holy cow, they're making a type of gasoline that's so low quality that the only two things that it can run in is the American Humvee motor, which will run on anything, and this one type of motor that's in these kinds of trucks and small vans. And that's why you're not seeing them bring heavy armor or their tanks. That's why you're seeing them bring these two things. And then we got a next really cool thing, which was, well, if those things mean a lot to them, then didn't we blow up some of those things, a couple of days ago? Let's send a Reaper, maybe as it's coming back by that area, to look there and assess, are they trying to recover damaged vehicles so that they can make use and return some of those few vehicles that they've got to service? Holy cow. Yeah, look, there's the tracks where this vehicle was drug away. Hey, other intelligence capability, can you tell me where that might have gone? Yeah, it went here. And 3 or 4 other things that look exactly like that went to the same spot. Hey, boss, I think we just found a new target. So that was often how the tactics really evolved, was just, why is the fight looking like it is? Find somebody who can really just deep dive the problem. That's, to be honest, that's what Star Baby does really well as well. Just bird dog right down into the guts of a problem, and then come back and say, that's occurring because this. And because this, it means you should see these other things along with it. And if you see those things that confirm it, here's how you can attack it. So that was the problem that weapons school trains its graduates to solve over and over and over. which is, here's the poorly defined problem. There is a solution there. Get it. So
That's very interesting. Did you then I'm trying to understand the layers of the planning and of the initiatives around the planning. So are you solving, it sounds like you're solving sort of day-to-day problems. You said it right at the beginning, you're always on the back foot. Things are changing, you've got a set of plans. Going back to the Warden example of the centers of gravity, maybe not having those in place traditionally, but I know that eventually, through the fight against ISIS, they went after the money men. They went after the people that ran
yeah.
and were paying for the business. So, um, was that a thing at the time? Were you also being told, okay, yeah, hit these vehicles, deny them the ability to, sort of operate their vehicles and take vehicles to the front or whatever, but also, here might be this might be where this guy lives or that person lives, or they might be holding, some hostages to here or there. Were you
Yeah.
also doing those sorts of things too?
I think that kind of human network was always a more of a specialty of our special operations component and their intelligence adjuncts that really focus on that. The traditional, so I'm very much of the traditional military background. I'm not from a special operations background, and our job is to think about those core military functions. So transportation, communication, training and equipping new soldiers. So you're thinking about that kind of core ability. As an airman, I'm thinking about their ability to generate air power and air defenses, but ultimately, all the joint functions. So maneuver, logistics, intelligence collection, communication, all of those things are what you're looking at. The reason we define them so generically is because whether or not you are a nation state army or whether or not you are, you're little more than, 3 or 4 thugs, you are probably going to do those functions. And so ISIS was a large enough organization. They absolutely had to solve how are they going to maneuver, how are they going to coordinate, how are they going to keep security, how are they going to conduct intelligence operations. It's not going to look like yours, but I promise that activity is being done. And as soon as you find a couple of threads of how they're doing one of those indicators, you can pretty quickly begin putting together the elements of that part of the tapestry. That's different than what that human terrain specialization stuff was, the human side of it, which was interesting. And I want to expand on that a little bit. I had one night where we were doing, there was a shadow, I forget what the title was, but this guy was basically a shadow governor of a province. He was kind of the ISIS shadow governor of a province of northern Iraq that was certainly giving us a bunch of grief. And was this is when the Iraqis were actively attempting to regain regional security in that sector. And this guy was continuing to operate effectively. And so he was continuing to coordinate his forces. And what was so interesting is we had an element of that kind of human network centric activity that said, well, we can see into the money stream a little bit more. We don't know who this individual is. We're not positive where this individual is, but we can see into the money stream. And we're going to inject essentially extra money. It wasn't like shut the money down. It wasn't take it away. It was we're going to inject extra money into this stream and see what happens. And within about a day and a half, that guy was dead from basically all of his those peers of his that could see the money activity, and all of a sudden he had more than he should have. They probably thought that he was corrupt, or that he was on the take, or he was skimming something. And it was another really interesting way of targeting. You're like, okay, I was looking for, let's find this guy's house so we can put a piece of ordnance into it. And they were looking at it like, how do we discredit him in a way that makes it dangerous for him to be around his peer group? So, looking at your adversary as a system, Warden was right in that any organized violence, organized political violence is going to have certain modalities. It's going to have people that are involved. It's going to have certain activities that are definable. Essentially what it's going to involve. It's just how it's going to do it is going to look differently. How they organize is going to look differently. How they're going to communicate is going to look different. But that doesn't ever mean you shouldn't look. And in fact, early on, we had some guidance of, well, we're not going to do a target system analysis. ISIS is such a departure from a traditional adversary. A target system analysis is where you really go, okay, who is this adversary that we're fighting? And you begin tasking all the intelligence agencies to collect and fill in the data gaps you have about how do they pay their fighters, how do they coordinate, how do they keep security of their message traffic, stuff like that. And initially, we weren't necessarily doing that because it was so we were reacting. And the first thing that we had to do was just use our assets to get enough so that we could stop them from doing really awful things and begin to roll them back. But as soon as we began unpacking them and says, okay, they've only got so many vehicles, they have to either repair or replace them, and they're not replacing them, so they're going to try to repair them. Guys, our new mission, we have to find the repair spot. And when you find a bunch of tracks that indicate vehicles are being drugged to one spot, there's your repair yard, right? That was really easy to figure out. So where we did, I think where it took a little bit of time was, again, having the system get creative and go, okay, well, they're not getting their gas from what we would get our gas from, nice big central refineries and pipeline distribution and truck transport to deliver it. They're using barrels in the back of, bongo trucks that are being transported across the desert. But that's still logistics. So just target the logistics and accept the fact that it looks different. That was one of the big ways that we really had to recalibrate ourselves. And once we did, it wasn't an easy problem, but it was a solvable problem.
That's fascinating. So when you describing that the individual that they injected some extra money into his bank account and got him taken out by his peers, that so does that suggest that in your cell of planners in the CAOC, you have your multidiscipline? So it's not just you as a fighter pilot and patch wearer. There's also I don't want to say intel people. What I mean is like intelligence agency people.
Oh, absolutely. I think some of the discipline that has become targeteering, it's a shallow view of targeting to just think of it as we'll figure out which building it is, and then we'll pull really good coordinates so a GPS guided weapon can go to the exact right spot. That is absolutely short of what targeting is. Targeting is, what are the activities that are allowing your adversary to generate military capability? And from that, break it all the way down to nodes of networks that can be broken, key personalities that need to be removed from driving an organization into a particular direction. Certainly, there are certain buildings and like that repair yard that had to be taken out 100%, or there's stockpiles of cash, and it's very difficult to replace cash once you've blown it up. Those are really traditional, and that's easy to think about in our kind of kinetic mindset. But targeting is a much broader activity than that. So we would absolutely work across the perspective. And when we would do our JTCB, Joint Targeting Coordination Board, we would be presenting for senior leader approval targets, because at the end of the day, we're talking about layers in the organization again. So Central Command, insofar as they are the lead U.S. agent, and insofar as in many ways our coalition partners are willing to, like in the UK side, op Harrogate, are willing to align national objectives and nest those national objectives within the national objectives of the coalition. CENTCOM has this dominant voice in what those are. And they'll say, we need to make sure that we're creating conditions, for instance, in July and August of 2014, to stop the further advance of ISIS into Mosul, stop the penetration of ISIS outside of Haditha. They will set that. And all the service components who are working with the intelligence agencies, in addition to the intelligence agencies themselves, will start nominating targets. And they'll say, based on the priorities that you have given us at a national level, at a central command level, we think that it's most critical to, I'll make things up, but hey, there's bridges in Mosul that if we stop that, they'll stop moving heavy equipment across. There's fuel depots that if we take them out, they'll be unable to extend their reach into the southern side of Mosul. There's very natural stuff like that comes up. But that activity of the joint targeting coordination begins to really blend your military and your intelligence activities pretty profoundly, because there are absolutely times where you go, I would just love to absolutely shut down the shadow Wazirat's ability to finance fighters in Mosul. But that's the one guy that we have good penetration on. And if we take this dude out, we're going to lose insight into the network for a really long time. So we choose not to. Or man, we've gained 3 or 4 other levers that we can use to get at this, and that one guy is such a problem that let's come up with a creative way to do it. Well, I don't know where he is, but in the case of, that wasn't what we did, but that was in the case of a different a special operations element that had that activity as a target set, came up with a really creative way of getting at it. By the way, I'm not positive they anticipated that outcome. Um, it was basically, let's screw with them and see what happens. And we learned a really productive lesson.
Yeah. Wow. So this sounds like I'm asking a facetious question. I'm not. You mentioned hitting piles of cash. From a weaponeering point of view, how do you hit cash and make sure it burns?
It burned surprisingly well.
Okay.
Yeah, so there was in Mosul specifically, there was a bank that ISIS had knocked over, and we had good intelligence that they had moved a large stash of the cash from one location to another. And heat blast and overpressure, General Kane's brief you saw probably about the B2s very recently. Uh, he'll talk about heat blast and fragmentation, but heat blast overpressure as well. DNARs burn really well once you get them into a confined space and you raise the temperature of that room by about 1,000 degrees. So that cache, fortunately, at night when there's not a lot of people around that cache went away real fast, and it was just another way that we could make things difficult for ISIS. ISIS was it was kind of a interesting adversary to fight too, because there were things that they did that we had seen in other conflicts and other contexts, but it just was kind of a what's old is new again. So as a for instance, in Kobani, when they were driving up north to Kobani in this would be September 2014, and it was kind of a key crossing point where the Kurds were trying to escape into Turkey. It's an area that Kurdish citizenry were really trying to defend an enclave of personnel from what had otherwise been pretty awful attacks by ISIS. And as they were getting pushed up there, we had seen a couple of times in a row that they were on these really high intensity siege cycles where the ISIS fighters would kind of fight really, really hard, and they would overwhelm the local defensive capabilities or the local militia capabilities or whatever. But by the time we saw this happening in September, we had really gotten smarter. And again, I had some phenomenal intelligence people. I wish I could say their name, but I don't want to for their sake, who really tore into this problem. And it was because of them that they were going, holy cow, when we unpacked this, we're sure, based on our observations, that the Iraqis said, ISIS brought 400 fighters, and that's why they were just, able to roll a police battalion or whatever. We did all the math we could on this one. We looked at it every possible way. We think there was about 25, but here's what they did different. There was about 25, and they were on enough amphetamines that they just arrived and started going like superhuman rate for like 48, 54 hours. And then they crashed because you just can't do that for long. And anybody who was a bit of a history student is like instantly thinking about, German Panzerschokolade, amphetamines in the tank crews diet. And you go, oh, okay, so I think we know how this goes. So by September, by the time we're seeing them do the exact same thing, do this like lightning siege with light, fast forces in Kobani, we had via our special operations channels again, we actually had mechanisms to talk to like the mayor of Kobani, which was pretty wild, and get them information like, this is bad. We understand what blocks they're in, but they're actually a bit of a smaller force than you might be thinking. And if you guys can hold on for, check the clock, about another 24 hours, they're going to go on, post-amphetamine surge nappy time. And so like, now is not the time to go on a counteroffensive. Why don't you guys wait about another one period of darkness and maybe even fall back a little bit, but then go on your counter offensive. And was actually surprisingly effective to give them good guidance. Like, hey man, don't do this while they're in the peak of their drug fueled surge. Do this when they're actually in their crash.
Wow.
It was. And then because that whole world, the kind of security force assistance / special operations world have that high fidelity human network, it was phenomenal. The information that we started getting out of there of, we're looking at the map and going, as a Air Force officer, there's things I don't target. I don't target schools. I don't target hospitals. I don't target mosques. I just don't do those things. Unless there's really specific reasons to do those things, like the mayor of the town says in a letter addressed to the CAOC, like, hey, that school has been taken over, that church, that hospital is no longer being used by civilian patients, it's being used as a command and control center. And thanks to some really smart people who liaise with the people in the moment of need, having specific language on that letter, like, I, the mayor, remove no strike list protection from the following structures. Like, wow, somebody gave you some outstanding coaching on exactly what to say, but add that to the list. So
that's fascinating.
The way targeting works, we will use any input, and then we apply these amazing intelligence professionals, whether they're in uniform or they're in civilian clothes, and they will get to the bottom of it, and they will give us options. And again, CENTCOM is saying, these are my priorities right now. Stop an offensive movement, or limit their ability to advance, or stop them from committing atrocities in these cities. And we will do targeting to try to achieve that effect. And no matter how impossible it seems, you always have to step back and go, nope, this is an adversary force who's going to do predictable, normal things to achieve their outcomes. They just don't present in a way that I was expecting. So we have to reframe how we're going to look for these things. And as soon as we begin finding one, you can find predictable next things. And the next thing you know, you've got options. You take that back into the bosses. You say, this is, you were going to target that bridge. You don't need to target that bridge. You'll need that bridge to do your counteroffensive. What you need to do is you need to target this, this, and this. And we try to present options.
Did you, Maestro? I'm curious to know, and one of the questions I'll ask you later is around the long-term psychological impact for you and the guys and girls flying the jets when you went out there in 2017. Having to deal with this brutal enemy and some of the things that they saw. But I want to just stay with at the moment this sort of 2014-15 period where you're on the CAOC. Emotionally, psychologically, how do you look at ISIS at that point in time as a human? So, and what I mean by that is, I say as a human, I guess what I mean is a warfighter, because you've been through weapons school, you've been to Iraq and Afghanistan flying the Strike Eagle, you've trained and trained and trained, and now you have what seems like, I mean, it's what you've just described actually is maybe part of the answer to the question, which is that actually they just present differently, but the problem solution sets are the same. But are you at this point looking at them thinking these guys are unstoppable, they're a slippery fish, none of the things that we have trained for really have equipped us to deal with them? How do you feel about them as an adversary, and what do you at that point think their fate will be?
Well, I think that slippery fish might be a good description at first, especially because if you recall, the transition from there's an ongoing Syrian civil war to there's a group emerging within the ungoverned spaces of eastern Syria, to that group, which is now beginning to attest its aspirations to establish an independent caliphate, which would have occurred, really late spring, early summer of 2014, to there's now convoys of up-armored Humvees that have been captured from the Iraqis that are arriving outside of major cities that we, the Americans, and our coalition allies as well, had visceral memories of how hard the fight to stabilize a Fallujah or a Mosul or et cetera was. I think all of that created a canvas for an image to begin playing out, that we all remember how hard that fight for Mosul was. And oh my gosh, by their own propaganda, they just took it in a matter of days or weeks, what we took a much longer period of time. They must be 10 feet tall, or there must be massively larger numbers of them than we're giving them credit for. It turns out there was a tremendous amount of theater in that, that I think is worth expanding on a tiny bit. But for us, I think that we were a little bit biased to consider the challenge that we had as an amplifier for how good they must be because of what they're doing. And it took us a little bit of time to really unpackage things to understand that no, their battle rhythm and their ops tempo is probably drug fueled, or they're getting the benefit of um, really unintruded or unexploited communications because we just haven't found that communications channel yet. But as soon as we do, we'll fully crack it and we'll exploit it completely. They're rolling into areas where the Iraqis were already a little bit exhausted. And so it's not like you were fighting the Iraqi army circa 2003. You were fighting now a much less capable force in 2014, right? This is not necessarily Saddam's army. This is now what's kind of come together. It's a little bit tribal, it's a little bit fractured. And the theatrics part of it is that ISIS would, in ways that we only learned about kind of after the fact, they would do theatrics, for instance, in Mosul. Well, hey, we're gonna begin degrading the power, the water services with essentially sleeper agents, so that when we come in, we can turn all those things off. We can give ourselves an advantage. We know where the disadvantage is going to be for the Iraqis, for the security forces. We know how to very quickly go at them and get them to step aside. And because we turn them off, we can turn them on. And once we turn them on, aren't we going to look like a super amazing and capable force? Because we not only did the defeat in a matter of days, but we also restored services in a matter of days. It was theater.
Hmm.
It took us a while to understand that theater. So once we did, though, we were able to kind of unpackage that a lot better. But when we think about kind of the mindset, I think that we were really informed by our own previous experiences. And every time they did something that made something that what we did that to our recollection was hard look easy, it amplified their credibility in our own mind. But they did it through, I think, in a lot of cases, a lot of theatrics.
So you had, I mean, just as a civilian, from my point of view, looking at them, I think the media probably had its role to play in creating a sense of
Oh,
dread.
sure.
But when I was looking at them, thinking, my goodness, how will we ever stop them? And then when they did eventually go away, I don't know if they have gone away completely, but they went away in the sense that they were no longer the sort of the menace across two or three different countries that they had been. Um, I was amazed because I just didn't think it was going to happen. But so the ideology, of course, won't go away. That will always be with us, and we'll have to contend with that. But
Yeah.
as an organization, they were dealt with. Um, so can I ask a little bit about the sort of targeting cycle? I think perhaps that's the description. Maybe OODA loop is probably what we would
Yeah.
think about sort of in olden days terms. How did you get to the point where you knew what was working and what you didn't, what wasn't working? Was it something as simple as you sat down and had a briefing? Was it calls from other patch wearers? What was the mechanism to
Yeah.
get you to a point where you understood what had worked and what had not?
That was uh, that was a difficult thing to get through because at first, in the battle damage assessment world, which again, I'll echo what General Kane, the Chairman Kane, just talked about with the B2 strike. You know, we don't we'll give a bomb hit assessment. We'll say, yeah, what I dropped went to where I expected it to go. That's great. But the whole point of battle damage is not did the thing blow up. It is what is their military function? What was the impact of your actions on their military function, logistics, transportation, offensive capability, whatever? And so, what we call kind of phase one BDA is did you do the thing that you intended to do? Phase two BDA is a more complicated activity because we then begin to go, okay, of the trucks you've hit, what's their total capacity for trucks? What's their total capacity for military transport? Now let's look at what percentage have you degraded them? Phase three is when we begin to look at, well, if they have 100% of their capability, they're going to do the following five activities. At 80%, they're going to drop this one and they're going to prioritize the following four activities. If we take them down to 70%, they're actually going to drop two and they're going to do the following three priorities. So it took some time because we hadn't started with a target system analysis of what ISIS really was. You know, they did catch us a little bit on our back foot. And because that, we had to work to get to the point where we said, well, okay, of the military functions that they can do, organizing, recruiting, all those things, this is how we think that our impact on those activities at the phase one level has now begun to manifest and grow into an overall effect on their capacities. That was tough to get to because we didn't start with an understanding of what that adversary really was. So we had to get there. We also had to, in some ways, force the issue. So it was a couple of patches that got together in the CAOC and other units, we had a great relationship with the location from which we operate at the time, most of our MQ-1 and MQ-9 aircraft. And the ISR capability in the theater is often reserved at pretty high levels. You know, where that limited ability to observe gets directed is going to be kind of held up at the central command level. Maybe some gets parsed out down to some service component activities or special operations activities, but in general, it's going to be held at high level. But through the patch network, we were able to go, well, even though you're being held at high level, you're going to fly past these points where the following 5 or 6 things of interest would be: we need to know whether they're trying to reconstitute. We need to know whether that previously struck training activity, did somebody go back there and try to harvest what little is left? Did that location that was that refinery activity that was hit, did that end the activity there, or have they sent trucks back to try to harvest what they could out of it, or maybe reconstitute some capability? So through the network, we were kind of able to start going, hey, we're not officially asking you because we don't have the authority to do it. But if you happen to be flying over these areas, here's a list of 15 things that if you can just give us a 15-second soak of video and send it back to the CAOC's intelligence folks, they'll be able to get at least a reasonable hack of, are they or are they not reconstituting that refinery activity? Are they making gasoline over there anymore? Because I think a lot of people were making gasoline. Tribes that have a business interest in just doing convoy transport in eastern Syria, they're going to do refining. So being able to get the video going, okay, but now I'm letting in a trained intelligence professional who can look at it from the eye of, I've seen that truck before. That's the type of truck that ISIS uses, versus that's probably just some tribe that sees an opportune ability to get a little bit of gasoline, right? We started to repurpose a little bit of the assets that were above our pay grade to access. And once we showed a few successes of, hey, sir, we just found you, a vehicle repair location, or we found where they're turning trucks into long-range artillery. That gave us the credibility to then go, this should be an activity that you specifically prioritize. And again, it goes back into that targeting cycle. You talked about, targeting cycle or OODA loop. It is nothing more than start with objectives of what you want to get done in a priority fashion, and then creatively unpackage that using doctrine of humans are predictable. We'll do pretty predictable things over and over, allowing it to kind of be nested with, but we're going to do it in our own way each time. But once we figure that out, we can then turn that all the way around into a cycle of, okay, sir, you made this a priority. We did that thing. Don't you want to know what the impact of that thing actually was on their ability to do the next thing? So the system should begin constantly leveraging off of itself. We talk about intelligence-driven operations. What we often saw, and this is before ISIS, this is with Afghanistan, this is with Iraq, before that, we often saw we had to have operations-driven intelligence. Like, hey, this is a valid target. We don't think it's the most important valid target now, but we don't understand their network well enough to know what's really going to happen. So let's get it. And then let's commit the assets so that we can do a really productive analysis of what did they actually, what military benefit did they lose because we took that target away from them. And then we could use operations to drive their intelligence production. So it is completely a cycle. I think occasionally we make it sound a little bit too formally, like it's this dark art that nobody could possibly fathom. It's not. It's come up with what's the objective and the outcome you're trying to do, creatively come up with some ways that you can do that, provoke your adversary to do a thing, or stand by to capture all the anticipated indicators that should come out from this. And then every confirmed indicator and every lost indicator is further information that you can just use to fill in missing pieces of your tapestry on them.
Does this also drive the development of technical capabilities and weaponry? I mean, I think
Yeah,
about I just interviewed Greece Panrisi.
yeah,
His episodes will be out by the time yours comes out, Maestro. But he was talking about, as an F-111 guy, GBU-28 being developed because they needed to be able to hit deeply buried bunkers, and that being a thing that was very rapid at Eglin.
yeah.
Did you see similar things? Are you in the CAOC? Are you also driving those conversations too? You've got a problem you need to solve, and the answer to it is a technological one or a weaponry or kinetic one.
Yeah. It's more often than not, it's a unique repurposing of a weapon you've already got. The GB-28 is a pretty phenomenal story, and making that out of retired Navy gun barrels on a less than 120-day cycle, finding just the machining capacity to do that is amazing in and of itself. We weren't quite that exotic, but um, there were things that we absolutely needed to do, especially in some cave target sets where none of the weapons that we had were really optimized for this. The EGBU-15 and AGM-130, which are certainly precise enough to go into caves, had essentially been retired at this time. So we needed to figure out ways of getting existing weapons into there, and they had to be used differently. A great, for instance, if you don't mind, I'll tell this story because I'm proud of the guys that did it, and it does draw us up to 2017. Now we're back in Kobani, or we're back up in the towns of northern Syria, and sorry, not Kobani, Raqqa, which was essentially the ISIS headquarters. There were some challenges that we were walking ourselves into by habit, that with GPS guided munitions, when you go to do your target measurements to plot very precise coordinates that are in the same datum plane that the weapon will read, that are in the same information plane that the satellites are going to contribute to the weapon, solving the X and the Y axis, the north and the eastings, is hard enough, especially when, if the bomb comes in at any angle at all, now any vertical error is going to contribute to essentially a lateral error in where it's going to come. So everybody was trying to put bombs in on either 85 or 90 degree, or essentially pure vertical impact angles, because it made your GPS coordinates as accurate as possible. Well, that's great until you have adversaries that have, we saw this. I was with Horde Clifton, and we saw ISIS using a multi-story, essentially an apartment block, where I think the third floor, we were watching mass waves of drones that they were flying off of the drones to do spotting work. On the next floor or two up, there was a bunch of snipers in multiple positions that were hammering the Kurdish forces as they were going into there, the YPG and the Kurdish forces. And then on the section of the roof, they had mortars that they were using to lob indirect fire into the area. So they had turned this apartment building into a pretty effective fighting position. And there was a way that we had allowed ourselves to habituate into it, which is, you're going to take your weapon, you're going to drop it right in the top. The problem is concrete with rebar in it is pretty tough on the weapons. So those, a 500-pound like a GBU-38 and a GBU-12 is designed to kind of penetrate into one airspace and then detonate. And when you're trying to get into the third floor, you have third floor of a 10-floor building, attempting to penetrate 7 roof floor structures is really more than those things can do. They begin to turn, and if you use very long fuse delays to allow the weapon to delay its explosion until it gets down into those things, every floor it goes in, usually the nose is deformed, the bomb is turned a little bit, and it begins flying out the side of the building. And it detonates as it's exiting the building, doing a lot less damage than you were really hoping for. So in this event, we were doing that. We solved the problem the first time by carrying aboard penetrators that were actually optimized for doing that kind of work. The next problem is we had a availability of the fuses that are actually survivable to take those multiple consecutive hits as they pound their way through a building, and those fuses were in short supply. So gosh darn it, we can't really do effective work with our 500 pounders like we need to. We've got 2,000 pounders that'll do the job, but there's so few, and the fuses are precious, the special operations joint terminal air controllers that are attempting to help us coordinate our strikes with the Kurds to keep pressure, keep inertia, they're very happy to use these things, but they're disappointed when, hey man, that was my one penetrator I can give you, and now I'm going to have to do the problems the other way. I will never forget. It was just an innovation of, hey, we are not going to be able to go through the top on these things, and I don't have enough ordnance to do the work that you need. And I understand that your Kurdish fighters are absolutely being hammered right now. And so my backseater horde, it was pretty much a, we're going to do something new. Do we have your permission to go in the side of this thing? I've got three what looks like main support columns. I'm going to take those things out, and I bet I can drop the whole side of the building. And the JTAC was pretty much like, I've got no better ideas. You are cleared to do what you think you need to do. So Horde and I do a pass. He's a really talented guy. He zooms in, gets his exact coordinates. And the next thing you know, we've got a salvo of GBU-38s that instead of going in the very top, we go, everybody's just going to have to take our word for it. I'm positive that the wonderful engineers at Boeing and Lockheed and everybody else have made our sniper targeting pod a lot more capable than we sometimes give it credit for. And he drove nails with that thing, and it went right through three main support columns. And the next thing you know, that entire structure, the whole side of the building, which was a vast fighting position, came down with it. And so sometimes it's about making the GBU-28. Sometimes it's about using your weapons in an entirely new way. Sometimes it's simply about remembering that your weapon sometimes has more capability than you're giving it credit for, and using it in a creative new way. I think that ultimately that style of attack became known as the kneecapper, and the JTACs heard about it, and they watched exactly what it did, and within about 24 hours it was the new hotness, and everybody's getting like, can you give me a 45-degree impact on the side of this on this support column? And we were able to really clear the way for a lot of effective forward motion by our ground force.
Did that make its way back then to Nellis and the weapons school and the 422? I mean, how do you promulgate that? How do you get that then? You've just done something new, it worked. Do you send it back to Nellis and then those guys go and see whether it
Yeah.
was a fluke? I mean, and then they put it in 3-1, or how does
Well, to be fair, half the time that you send things back, the test guys, who in many cases uh, are amazing at what they do, in many cases they come back to you and say, "Yeah, we always knew that would work. The only thing that was stopping you from doing that was some silly tactical prohibition on using low impact angle bombs. But hey, guys, 12 years ago, we made sure that the accuracy on that would have been good enough." So the military arts are fickle things, right? Sometimes it's about um, a policy prohibition that says, somebody briefed somebody that, sir, your weapons are going to be the most accurate they can possibly be when they're dropped pure vertical. And then it just becomes this kind of carbon copied thing of, well, the decision last year was vertical impact angles, so the decision next year is going to be vertical impact angles. So sometimes you need to just kind of rediscover that. It took exactly no time for everybody to figure out that that was the new hotness, call all their buddies back at whatever their division was in the test community and say, hey, is this valid? And the test guys would inevitably come back, yep, we proved that a while ago. And all of a sudden, what we were doing was not validating a new tactic. What we were doing was giving commanders the confidence that they could let their guys do something that was atypical.
I want to talk about 2017 then, and I want to talk about
Yeah,
your time in combat. But I have one more question about the CAOC I wanted to ask you about.
yeah,
I mean, there are lots of questions I would ask you, but we're not. Unfortunately, I don't have unlimited amounts of time, and I know you don't. But you talked right at the beginning about at some points going to the CFAC, sometimes going to the JAG, the Judge Advocate General. Is that what
yeah,
it stands for? The lawyer, the military
yeah,
lawyer. I just wanted to just get a sense from you about the lengths that you go to when you're planning these things, and to make sure you kill the right people and not the wrong people. So, civilian casualties obviously are bad. Collateral damage estimates need to be done. And I wanted to see what you are comfortable saying about working with lawyers. As a as
yeah.
a as a person who needs to just kill the target or do whatever. Uh, were there times where it was difficult to work with a lawyer because they were overly cautious, or conversely, do you actually say no? It's good that we've got that those checks and balances in place, and I'm happy to defer. What is the process like, and how did you get along with working with those lawyers?
I think I was pretty blessed. My CAOC JA at the time was a colonel named Todd Wold when I was in the CAOC, and we had we had strike packages that were going into new like in 2014 they were going into new countries, right, with Syria. That's not a named country in previous operations. We have to get specific legal approval for these things. There were problems that you are dealing with a Al-Qaeda affiliate. The authorization for the use of military force is applicable, but they may be interoperating with the Syrians, which are not a force that we're necessarily working with. So I say all that by way of acknowledging that there were new legal problems to work through. My experience that I really learned in 2014 and got reinforced when I was a commander was the lawyers are really good at making sure that you have considered the relevant references, that making sure that you have been advised about applicable policy or maybe policy decisions or interpretations of statute that are adjacent to what you're doing. But the really, really good lawyers will be very forthright about, I am not going to arrive on telling you you can or can't do this. If you tell me that to do your military operation, you want to do X, I will say that if it was just outright, you were going to violate a law of armed conflict, yeah, of course, they'd be the first person to throw a flag and guys, you can't do that. But the best of them, their style is to say, okay, you need to do this to achieve commander's intent, to achieve your military objectives. And you've briefed me now, I understand the situation, and the potential effects are this. These are the considerations you need to get through. Because at the end of the day, with the legal folks, it's a really interesting structure that nations, when they are thinking about their military's authorities, are never going to hold a lawyer responsible, right? There's never going to be a situation where you go, well, gosh, golly, the colonel judge advocate said I could, so let's run them up the flagpole and make them pay for the fact that we were nationally embarrassed about something. That's never going to happen. It's always commander's business. So the lawyers, my job when I was on the CAOC staff was to make sure that the lawyer understood the situation well enough to give the commander best military advice, to give the commander legal advice that was relevant to the situation, and to make sure that we hadn't buried any landmines in it. Like, well, you didn't know that if it happens to be one of our allies from these nations that go down, their national caveats aren't going to be respected at all. Like, we're not going to do that. We're going to make sure that we are being super abundantly clear about what it is. But at the end of the day, it's commander's decision. So when the commander says, I will take that risk, they are saying in a very unlimited fashion, remember that whole, I will be tried by 12, so they aren't carried by 6. They are saying in a very unambiguous fashion, I will fully go on the dock and take 100% accountability for this. That is my decision. That's why we get orders from commanders. We don't get orders from lawyers. We make sure that the lawyers are as aware as they can possibly be so that they can give us one of two things. Stop me from doing something that is blatantly against the law. Maybe I missed it. I might be low on sleep. Holy cow. And then help me to understand what that is, what that military commander's decision is adjacent to, that I might need to really, really think about. When we do law of armed conflict, people get, for instance, confused. There's distinction, necessity, proportionality, humanity. Those are the 4 guiding principles of the law of armed conflict. And we'll talk about like proportionality. When we were trying to save national citizens that were in a really, really terrible situation. They were being held by people that we knew were abusing and very likely to kill them. And so we had to go, we were on an extreme time crunch. And we had people that in the years of kind of Afghanistan and Iraq in its steady state had habituated to this almost miserly application of force that imagined an escalation up a ladder of escalation using absolutely tiny increments. We'll do a show of presence, and then we'll do a show of force, and then we'll do a warning shot over here. And if we need to, we'll do a more a close aboard warning shot. And if we really, really think we need to, we'll maybe put a couple of rounds into your truck. And then if all goes wrong, we'll put a bomb into whatever we need to. And they're imagining this highly graduated thing. Distinction and proportionality only ever told me that, hey, man, if I'm going to get somebody out of a terrible situation and a Dishka suddenly pulls up a tarp off on a roof and begins unloading on a helicopter, proportionality means that I don't take out that side of the village. I take out that threat. Whether I do it with a gun, with a 500 pounder, or what happens if I've only got a 2,000 pounder left because I've already been supporting troops and other. Is a 2,000 pounder appropriate to use against a 50 caliber weapon that's targeting my helicopter? If it's all I've got, it's proportional. You're trying to be lethal to me, I will now be lethal to you. Helping people to understand that was kind of a big thing, but also helping them to understand that, man, if you're about to do that, this isn't like, okay, the guy took a couple of shots and then you saw the operator run away, and now you also see a mama gathering kids in the backyard and pulling them into the house. Like, that did change things. Maybe it is not the right time to drop that anymore because you saw the operator leave the threat area. But teaching people to do that kind of stuff is about training the military operator mind of like, hey, I need you to understand some simple rules. If they are defensive, tried by 12 instead of carried by 6. If you're on the offensive and you have a doubt, ooh, they just left the gun and mom is pulling kids into the house, you have a doubt, there is no doubt. That thumb comes off the hammer and you give it a potato until you see whether I need to get there or not. But don't let misunderstandings of things like distinction and proportionality, which biased us, just like we were biased when in 2017 with the drone that we had to shoot down. We were biased to, I should do little tiny things. I'll jam a little, maybe I'll affect their communications, maybe I'll make it difficult for the operator to operate that. Like, no, dude, they are attempting to use lethal force on your guys. Like, at that point, all of that petty stuff is no longer relevant, and you are misreading distinction and proportionality. You now need to end that threat. So helping people to understand that is, I think, one of the things that commanders really have to do, because of what I said. At the end of the day, the lawyer doesn't get brought up on, the lawyer doesn't get told by the combatant commander, you were wrong. I am firing you because I need to change the decision-making structure of your organization. The lawyer doesn't do that. It's the commander. So it stays commander's business. So we would advise the bosses, they would advise us. And as a commander in 2017, I would try to make sure that people understood a mindset so that they could do that, because it's the most common thing in the world for the aircrew who are in these circumstances to go, what's my guidance? And it's not easy to help people to understand. Like, when aircrew fly with the spins, like the special instructions for air combat, like how you're going to perform your missions, these are long sections of the spins, and they are written by operators but reviewed by lawyers, and they are trying to write extremely precise language of, you may do this, you must not do that, you sometimes can do this. And at the end of the day, I need somebody with wings on their chest to just go and actually make a decision. And they're going to then report that decision to their commander. The commander is going to have accountability in front of a commander above him of, did you train that person? Was their mindset right? Did they understand the law? And that's how we're going to do it. So it was always good with the lawyers to have a slightly adversarial relationship, because I wanted to press them and I wanted them to press back on my thinking. And every time I saw a lawyer who would carry that adversarial relationship past its point of utility to the point where they were trying to tell me to not do something, I would usually come back with the question of, is what I'm about to do dumb, wrong, or stupid? Or it was not dumb, wrong, or stupid. It was like dumb, wrong, or illegal. Like, illegal, you have a voice and you can tell me that is illegal and I won't do it because I don't want to be doing illegal things. But dumb and wrong, I own that. I can do dumb and wrong. I can choose to do dumb and wrong. But illegal, you stop me from doing that. That was a long conversation about, you're trying to create a warrior mindset. You're trying to create where people's understanding of what they can do is, and lawyers can definitely inform that. But the best of them will go and stress your thinking on it right up to the point where they realize that they are now beginning to provide your judgment for you, and then they'll step back and they'll remind you, you are ultimately the person who needs to make this decision. And it's frustrating because you want clear black and white, you can do that, and you're almost never going to get it.
It's very different from the days of Dresden.
Yeah.
um, so with all this in your experience, then what are you thinking as you get back to Lakenheath? You take command of the 492nd, and you know you're going to deploy to take part in combat operations against ISIS. What do you
Yeah,
think?
I think the first thing I'm thinking is how lucky I am to have great predecessor leaders like Shifty Herd and Quadro Hund, who have created a really potent squadron. How lucky I am to have weapons officers like Nuke Raven, Bam E2, and Notch Anderson, who are just the best in the business. They would go on to become squadron commanders themselves. They are, you can't ask for better to make sure that your guys are trained. And then even down to the air crew, of course, the support, the families. My first thought is how lucky we are to have these amazing people doing this. The next thing, and I was blessed with outstanding director of operations who was really a fellow traveler in making sure that the air crew were expert in the procedures as defined by the spins. So we would train rigorously about that. We interestingly also had nuclear surety inspections that we also had to train for. So talk about two missions with really different objectives, but at the end of the day, we knew that we were trying to create a mindset that would allow the operator to continue to operate even when they were confronted with extreme levels of ambiguity. We wanted to create that for people because things have gotten really strange. You heard from Stinger, it's weird when you have Syrian MiG-29s, Russian Su-27s and Su-35s that are interoperating around your guys. They're certainly not respecting your altitude deconfliction plans. They're certainly not respecting that, hey, man, the Joint Terminal Air Controller told all fast movers to be on the north side of the town. And what are you doing in my block on the north side of the town? They would, that was a real wrench to throw in things. With the Syrians, we're not at war with the Syrians. If the Syrians want to fly their aircraft in their country, then realistically, they're probably going to do that. We would attempt to coordinate with them. There was things like, there were special communication channels that we had with the Russians and then via the Russians to the Syrians that we would attempt to use to avoid situations that got really out of hand. But that was different. And then you're trying to work with ground allies like the vetted Syrian opposition forces, where you go, okay, these guys, we've checked them out. We know who they are. We trust them. We can use lethal effects on their behalf. Those guys, just some other tribal militias, we can't really do much for them, but maybe our special operations guys will do something for them. And then there's the Kurds, at the time in certain areas we could do things pretty explicitly for. So there was a lot to work through. We wanted Jester Losi, who was my director of operations at the time, myself. We had great flight commanders and training leaders and instructors and weapons officers that were all committed to making sure that the guys weren't going to stumble into a situation where they acted inappropriately based on guidance that did hold us back. But at the same time that they understood that it's going to get gray a lot and you're going to have to do what you're going to have to do. So for instance, I had this happened to another flight of mine, just amazing people. There was a Syrian, I think it was a Su-24, that was basically harassing them while they were doing troops in contact, close air support for some special operations guys. So I've got a pilot that is trying to coordinate his headbutt against the Su-24 with a backseater that's trying to just get his wings level at just the right time to guide a GB-54. And they did both at the exact same time. And you go, nobody thought about that one. Nobody trained for that one. Stinger's examples later in the campaign, further into the fall of 2017, when you've got guys that are at night trying to use their afterburner to distract a Russian fighter to come after them, and then diving into the clouds to confuse them because they're not flying with MVGs probably. And at the end of the day, a heavily loaded Strike Eagle with bombs and fuel on board is really going to have a hard time outturning some of those 227s. So you better put something in between him and you that makes it really difficult for him to visually track you, like a big cloud at night. That's a really great idea. So guys were coming up with really creative tactical solutions. And also it's against the Russians. Like, say what you will, but when occasionally the flight does involve some witty banter back and forth of them telling you you have a great looking airplane, you're like, this is just messing with my mind, right? So you had the guys that you definitely didn't want to mess with. You had guys that you could mess with under certain circumstances. You had guys that who you could defend. You had guys that you better not fail to defend, and then you had some other guys that only if certain things happen can you maybe defend them. If we wanted our guys to have creativity, to seize the initiative, and not like have a paralysis by analysis moment in the cockpit. And we wanted them to have simple rules that they could use and go forth and do what they could do. So as a great, for instance, June 6th and June 8th of 2017. The first day I wasn't with Stinger. The second day I was, and we'll get there. But we had a Syrian MiG-29 that there was a little garrison that the U.S. had in a location of southern Syria that was important for essentially area security, and it was important that we kept that capability. And we had guys that were hanging it out in this little spot, and it's a dangerous area, and we were going to make sure that they had all the support that they possibly needed. Well, the next thing you know, there was a MiG-29 that would come out, and basically, I swear to goodness, the guy was doing air shows over Route 1 in Syria, which runs up towards Damascus. He probably had some Syrian little army camped there, and he would show up in his MiG-29 that always had no tanks on, no external bombs, and we would watch him nearly slam his MiG-29 into the ground on the targeting pod because he was doing loops to music over a road, and I'm pretty sure he was entertaining some troops on the ground. And so that morning, June 6th, I check in. I'm relieving the dawn patrol flight that's right in front of me. And, I'm getting the whole, hey, the MiG-29 is there, but he's like 30 miles away from our guys, which have a perimeter that we've said, don't go here. And so all good until it's not, until that guy just goes beelining for our guys. And by the way, he's not doing loops to music with no tanks, no bombs. He's got 2 rocket pods on, because what was happening was there was ground force engagements between Syrians and some opposition forces, and they were going to use rockets, but they were going to use those rockets right in vicinity of the American forces. What are you going to do? How are you going to creatively do this? I can't shoot that guy down. If he shoots my guys, I can definitely shoot him down, but by then it's already mission failure. Gosh, I might have already let a guy be carried by a 6, right? So what are you going to do? So very creatively, number 2, who was a phenomenal flight lead himself, he just happened to be my wingman that day. Hey man, I want you to get on that guy's 6, spike the heck out of him, let him know that you're there, like be close enough to be visually intimidating. And every time he rolls in, we're going to try to throw 50 foot of speed brake and Rodan dark gray back of the wing in this guy's face. And I don't think he's going to be able to aim very well. And I bet he's not going to be able to shoot those guys. He's not going to be able to roll in and shoot the people that we may have a responsibility to defend here. That was an example of, we just had to keep on coming up with these really oddball creative solutions for, okay, this isn't exactly my target, but I can't let bad things happen. So I have to do this thing now, or else something worse will occur. 2 days later, we had the event, and I know Stinger talks about it, but I like to give a little bit of the preamble because it matters. There was a Syrian encampment very close to the U.S. encampment. If you imagine that we've said, hey, here's airspace around where the U.S. guys are and coalition guys, that airspace, hey, we want to protect that. And we had communicated, I think, via the whatever means we were using to pass information to the Russians and through the Russians to the Syrians. This is no go, man. Do not try to get into this piece of sky right here. And in fact, don't try to get into this piece of ground either. If you bring in something into this that looks like a threat, we're going to burn it down. All of a sudden, we're watching the Syrian guys who are just outside of the area come in, and they've got ground trucks, they've got some threat vehicles, and in the same way that we've said, don't be in this area, we'll burn you down. They came into it, and we had a drone right overhead, and we watched them engage those ground vehicles, and boom, we took them out. All of a sudden, shortly after that, that drone that had done the engagement of the Syrian vehicle, that drone leaves. And the next thing you know, our formation, it was really my number two, who's gone on to become a better fighter pilot than I ever was. Yeah, pretty amazing aircrew pilot and Wizzo. But they have now found this little drone that looks like one of ours. It's got weapons like one of ours. It's in an area where we just used a drone against them, in an area where we said you shouldn't go, and now our guys are in an area where they say we shouldn't be, and they've got one over. Like the mirror imaging of this was just too perfect, and it really put both Stinger and my, like, the hair on the back of our neck was up. Like, this is going to be bad. The challenge that we got was two things. One, we haven't seen a lot of armed drones before. So the CAOC is now really chewing on something new. And we already said, every time that thing chews on something new, you know, they're going to go run over and talk to the lawyer. They're going to run over and be like, hey, I haven't seen this before. Has anybody else seen this before? What do we do with this particular thing? And they're going to start flipping through and going, what does the commander's guidance say here? Does anything directly apply? I'm making that up. I don't know if that actually occurred. I didn't debrief it. But I was at the CAOC, and my mindset was, I know this is going to throw a wrench in their ability to give really concise guidance. I know that they're going to default to, we want to make sure we don't overstep any boundaries. So we're going to tell the guys at the forward edge, pull back a little bit, because we don't want to accidentally escalate. Because at the end of the day, none of us want to inadvertently make General Hesterman at this time, or sorry, I forget who the CFAC was, General Harigian at the time. We don't want to make him buy an escalation in his air campaign because we accidentally did something that was, going to drive the Russians or the Syrians to do something. So we know that the system is now chewing on all those possible excursions. The problem is, just like Stinger talked about, is they are definitely, when police talk about having capability and intent, well, they're there. They've got the capability because of the ordinance. They've got the intent based on what I believe we've just seen, which is our drone did their guys in. They're going to do our guys in. Like, this is too much similarity. And when we watched as long as we possibly could stand to. We kind of took ourselves a little bit lower on fuel than we wanted to, and we lost the ability to have a little bit of continuous coverage. So, okay, man, let's go get some gas. We'll come right back and watch this guy, because we're not getting any enabling communications from higher headquarters. And while we were away, I don't know if the guy knew we were away, but while we were away, they popped a missile in. It's also another part of the story that I think Stinger may have mentioned this. We talk about in war, the first reports are in, now we'll await the truth, right? First reports are inevitably inaccurate. And I think elements of the CAOC we're hearing from various channels, because that little outpost is probably communicating back to a tactical operations center, who's probably communicating back to somehow up to the Army's chain of command, who's then lateraling it to the Air Force's system. And somewhere in that telephone game, they were getting told, nothing, no damage, no harm, nothing really happened. But we're talking directly to the guys on the ground, Stinger is, and they're going, dude, it hit right next to a vehicle that we weren't in at that moment, but it was one of ours. Like, the fact that it dudded is probably the only reason why, we don't have a loss of life or property right now. And you go, holy cow, that really changes things. And now I know, okay, I am positive at this point, there is a mismatch between my perspective, or I should say our flight's perspective on what's going on in this moment, and what higher headquarters. They probably think that they've got more time, more ability to deal with things. Stuff hasn't escalated very much. And we're thinking they've got 2 missiles on this thing. They've just used one in an attempt to be lethal. It failed. And we very quickly after that went through the whole rigmarole of, we're going to try to use a non-kinetic effect. Stinger and I had a very brief conversation, and it was basically to the effect of, hey, man, you try to kill our people, and we don't think you should have that toy on the battlefield anymore. So we're making this thing go away one way or the other. So decisions were made, and we were able to take that down. What I thought was the real after the fact testament to the system being able to learn and correct was that, first of all, we didn't get like a phone call after the fact, hey, what just went on? We got the CFAC is going to come around to talk to his organizations, and he's going to make sure that you understand exactly his perspective. And on arrival, the CFAC, who traveled around to a bunch of other locations, basically said, I'm not going to be able to give you guidance for every possible situation. I expect you to do exactly what you did that day. Locally, come up with what your game plan is, execute it violently. And so absolutely nothing happened wrong with that. As an aside, as a commander, I basically told guys that, like, hey man, there's some subordinate call signs underneath the level of the guy who just came and talked to us and said we did it right, who probably are still chewing on their confusion about how fast we came to a decision and what should we do. And those subordinate call signs, I won't go through the list, but they don't have his call sign. They have other call signs. And I told the squadron kind of outright, I was like, guys, the man has given us his guidance. I affirm that guidance. Locally, here's my expectations. If you see one of those things ever get within X kilometers of one of our things again, you don't have to wait for it to try to shoot first. You kill it. And I think that we got real validation. And I told people, if other call signs from the CAOC are telling you not to do that, you have my authority to say, Bowler 1 said, no, we're executing on local guidance per the CFAC's previous previous guidance. And they could tell him, like, talk to me, because you're not going to slow my guys down. And then a couple of days later, we had an event that was exactly that. It was 2 of our aircrew were out, or 2 of our F-15s were out. They saw a very similar aircraft on a very similar profile going right for our guys. They basically just made an announcement like, hey, we're doing this back, and we killed it. And the cool thing is I did hear from my CAOC buddies. They're like, sorry, my lights. They were like, hey, we went and we ran over and we woke the CFAC up because it was a nighttime thing, and we let him know. And he basically said, why are you here? Why are you bugging me? Good. They did what I told them to do. Great. Talk to you tomorrow.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
What did you make of the Russians and their part in that particular engagement then? Because
Yeah.
they were messing with you. Do you think they knew what was going on? What did you know about what they knew? What do you think that you know about what they knew or what they didn't know?
Well, I knew that they at the time, I knew that they were assuming a pretty challenging posture for us. So we were going to kind of do the Mexican standoff. I do want to put one thing out there for the record. My number 2 is I've said a lot of names, but my number 2 is a really amazing aircrew pilot in Wizzo. They'll know who they are. They were the ones who spotted it. The only reason I didn't let them take the shot is because I did think this could get weird enough that they might, come drilling down and be like, my goodness, if General Harigi and the CFAC hadn't been the type of character that he had, the personality that he had, if he had been somebody that, was, I think, more pliable to scrutinize aircrew performance, then I wanted to make sure that the squadron commander who was on the scene got that heat. It worked out and everything was fine, but my number 2 was more than competent to do exactly what we did. In this case, though, I'm doing the Mexican standoff of I'm targeting the drone. A Russian is kind of saddled up on me. My number 2 boss is saddled up on him. And then there's the additional Russian that's just kind of cruising around out there. I certainly knew that our AMRAAM that was designed to find things exactly like Su-27s would love to see a Su-27 somewhere in its field of regard. So we were definitely thinking about, I sure don't want to shoot when they're anywhere near the front of us. I also don't want to shoot when the drone is going to like land on our guys, but I also don't want to shoot in an area where we're going to make it impossible for our guys to go get because, it's back over Syria or something like that. So we were playing a little bit of that game. In this case, I think that the Russian aircrew that were there, they would do this, like fly up next to you and then they would flash their belly, like, I don't know, make you look at their missiles. Ooh, here's my loadout. I'm gonna show it at you. They would do that, and then they would fly back and take their saddled position kind of behind you. So the threat was real. what I didn't know until after the fact was when I did call the CAOC later, I called multiple layers within the CAOC to have some discussions. And I found out after the fact that the Russians on the phone, the story as it's come to me is that there was kind of a new theater commander that had changed personalities from the previous guy and was attempting to strike a much more bellicose um, posture in his phone communications with the Americans. So he was directly threatening, like, if you do this, I will do this to these guys. Um, but this was about, I don't know, the 10th time that I've learned in my military career that one of the best ways to deal with Russian bluster is to punch him in the face. And you see exactly how far that bluster is going to go. So, we fired, we dropped the drone, and they skedaddled. They were done dealing with that problem. As soon as we shot, we were ready to, kind of go deal with the next guy, and they weren't having any of that. So, I think that we saw consistently with the Russian presence, with what we knew about the red line communication between them and us, with what we would see consistently going down to Stinger um, and Shady and Smack's nighttime, merges with the Russians over the Euphrates River Valley. They are absolutely willing to get into a very provocative posture. But I do indeed think that as soon as they see that, you're willing to lay some serious smackdown, they will make choices.
Hmm.
And usually it was to retrograde from a situation.
Is it, I mean, if I hope this isn't a stupid question, but is it very disconcerting to be operating like that though? You've just said it was a real threat. And you look at the invasion of the aftermath of the invasion of Ukraine, second invasion of Ukraine by Russia in 2021, where I think within 6 months there's an RAF RC-135 going down somewhere, and
Yeah.
they loosed off a AA-10 at it or something. The guy shot at it, and it was only, I think, some kind of malfunction or whatever. It didn't shoot it down, but it could have.
Yeah.
So those things happen regardless of commander's intent. Those things happen. So was that a real drain to have to operate with those guys harassing you, or the possibility actually you might get into a shooting fight with a flanker or an advanced flanker?
What we knew is or we had pretty good intelligence that the Russians are not trying to escalate this thing horizontally with a broader, set of adversaries. They do not necessarily want to go head to head against us. We knew that they had done things like this before, of saddling up on guys and getting into those kinds of postures. So we did apply, some understanding of the battle space. At no point can you rule out the chance that some, rogue Ivan is going to rip one off at you, or maybe that general really is serious and he's told his guys that if you see this, do that. That's certainly a possibility. And so I don't want to downplay that throughout the whole thing. Had we briefed, had we talked about, like, 100%, like, if this goes sideways, dude, you got that guy, I got this guy, and we're fighting now, 100%. And here's what it's going to look like if they do that. And if they crack a wing at you and throw on, I want you to throw a wing at them, punch your tanks off and spike them, see if that makes them go away, and if not, get ready to flare off the first shot, and I'll be there with the second one. So it was 100%. We had to be able to go with that contingency. But here's the bigger thing is, if you're so worried, and this is where I think, again, 2014 gave me some perspective on this. If you are so concerned that your action could be escalatory to the fact that you are now depriving your CFAC of the ability to maintain the initiative, or you're so worried that if you do something, it's going to set back an objective, and as a result of that, you wind up allowing the drone to normalize that I get to shoot at Americans. That's inconceivable. Like, you cannot let an adversary normalize that. I'm sorry, you shot at us. You don't get to have that airplane anymore. We're taking it off the battlefield. And the fact that that wasn't the mindset of some of the people with whom we were interacting really surprised me. Like, oh, it's just a drone. We'll jam it. Like, no, it's a weapon system. They tried to use it on our people. Acknowledged. You are getting a different set of intelligence reports that are saying it didn't get used, but I'm talking to the people against whom it did get used. So we had a mismatch of perspectives. But I think at the end of the day, what was really affirming was having the CFAC General Harigian come around and basically say you did it right. There's adversary intention to use deception and provocation and escalation to allow them to seize more initiative, to normalize more activity in areas that we don't want them, to push us back, all out of an abundance of caution and an abundance of willingness to avoid escalation. But if we do that, then we've given them the initiative. And basically to have a 3-star come around and be like, you guys did it right. You kept my initiative. You allowed me to assert that this is a line that we're going to respect. You crossed it. We killed the thing. And it allowed him to speak, I think, with clarity to his Russian counterpart in a way that had we backed down, he would be trying to verbally express a strength that we did with an AIM-120.
Hmm.
So I think we punctuated a posture that he needed expressed, and we were doing it at the policy level, but there is nothing like an operator actually, putting the dot at the end of that sentence in something that's hard and real.
So here's a change of tack then in the questioning. Do you claim a kill for that? Is that something that you say you got a star underneath your aeroplane
I,
like
th-
that?
I think we put a star on the airplane just for fun. Um, if I understand the rules on this, it is, I believe it does not count in any way for ACE, and that's a rule that came out of World War II. Unmanned aircraft don't count towards ACE. But it does count as a kill for the purpose of like your squadron's heritage. So I think that was what we wound up coming back with was it's basically credit to the squadron, credit to the aircraft, no credit to the pilot.
Yeah.
But our far bigger concern was on the ground. When I did get on the ground, first call wasn't to the CAOC. My first call was to the U.S. forces that were on the ground up in Syria. And the reason I needed to make that first call is because they just got attacked. Hey man, how are you doing? Is everybody okay? And it's this huge, mountain of a guy that had been down 1 or 2 times briefing us on the mission that are up there. He was not ODA, so soft guy, and he is having an emotional moment on the other end of this secure call. And so, dude, how are your guys? We're fine right now, but I've got the stingers out of the box and we're pointing them up. And I'm like, all right, I need you to walk that back because that's my 2-ship overhead, it wasn't actually. I got ripped out by a flight of F-18s. I was like, those are U.S. guys overhead, and I need you to kind of put those things back in the box. And again, it was somewhere in the system we hadn't quite again appreciated at that senior level. Like, hey man, the ground Jews just had an emotional moment, so they have taken out their surface air missiles and they are pointing them at my guys in the broader good guys environment. So again, calling over to the CAOC to talk to them, what happened from your perspective? Are you aware that the guys on the ground have their man pads out and they're at like air defense condition 1 and they're ready to shoot? And getting people to realize that you can't just look at your computer and like, oh well, I think I'll type, I'll chat what just went on, and oh sir, don't worry, the battalion ops center just told me a missile was fired, but it just landed harmlessly in the desert. Nobody was really affected. Everything's good at their end. Like, yeah, that's the thing that senior bosses tell each other, right? You need to hear from the actual guys on the ground what really just happened. What are you doing before you really know? So anyways, that was a bit of a diversion, but back to the tension between how pure war can be when it's conducted from a headquarters a long way away versus how sloppy things get in the field. You have to be willing to deal with sloppy Russian actions in the field, and you have to be willing to know what your lines are so that you can push back on that. I do think we got better lucky than good that the Russians were so willing to back down. I think that we totally could have exchanged aircraft parts over that part of Syria, but I'm also pretty positive that our stuff works better than their stuff.
Just on that note, I'm curious, and I'm sure if you choose to answer, you'll be vague. But I'm curious about how then you balance giving away your capabilities with protecting your capabilities. So you're shooting AMRAAM in an environment where presumably they've got ELINT aircraft up and they're sniffing the air for trons. They want to know
Sure.
what your frequencies are, what your characteristics of your radar is, doing certain things, the missile and that kind of stuff. Do you, is there a decision that's made at some level where you say, well, okay, don't use the AMRAAM unless you really, really have to? I mean, how does that work? How does keeping your stuff secret work with
Yeah, no, that's
regards to that kind of scenario?
it's a totally fair question. Um, I've taken a little bit of grief from guys for not gunning it. No, nobody can really exploit the bullet, so that's probably pretty safe. I will say we didn't use our best version of the AMRAAM. We used our worst version of the AMRAAM because totally possible that pieces fall and some lucky Syrian gets a piece that goes somewhere else. Hopefully, it's one that's a couple of years older than our most current. Um, those things are all interesting considerations to Monday morning quarterback. But when it really gets down to it, it's kind of like that distinction and proportionality conversation. You know, I just need you to use whatever is effective in the moment because over and over again, I keep on finding that as the more situations get complicated, the more it's incumbent on a smart operator to actually recognize, hey, man, this reduces down to this is a critical objective for the superior commander's scheme of maneuver. I need to make this happen by whatever means are necessary within the law of armed conflict. Hey, man, like, don't overcomplicate things. I think the guys who allow those kinds of thoughts to come in tend to arrive at similar positions to the people in the CAOC who go, well, maybe we'll try jamming it.
Hmm.
Okay, interesting that you have this sophisticated way you can attempt to reduce the threat of exploitation while still achieving outcomes. But sometimes it's just too cute. Hey man, you're just being too cute. Just do the thing.
Okay. Well, one of the things that we talked about right at the beginning, I think, and I said to you I wanted to ask you about was the very serious topic of the psychological effects of your guys and girls going out flying these missions, seeing the things that they did, and so I will be sort of non-specific about some of the things that I have been told off the record
Yeah.
by various people, but some of the things that I think that they saw with regards to ISIS lining people up to behead them. You're looking at a little monochrome display in the aeroplane, and through your sniper pod, you're seeing this stuff up close. You can't do anything about it. And
Yep.
and again, I'll be vague in regards to some of the things I've been told, but having to drop bombs, knowing that civilians were going to be killed because you dropped that bomb deliberately. The collateral damage estimate had been done, but the commander had said no, this target needs to be taken out,
Yeah.
and therefore some civilians will die. Um, what is the impact of that long term? You're the commander of the squadron. Are you thinking about this then? Do you think about it afterwards? Do you? I don't want to sound dramatic because it's almost as though it's sort of trivializing it. But do you think there will be people now experiencing difficulties having had that experience? And what do you say to them? What do you do about it?
Yeah. I think that we can't be ignorant about the fact that that strain is very real. Um, I share this at a personal level. There was a mission that I did in 2008 in Afghanistan that got very out of hand very quickly. It was kind of one of those. We were on the extreme northwestern side of Afghanistan. There wasn't a lot of coverage up there. It was just a two ship and a tanker. Norwegian Special Operations Forces that had been ambushed in a very complex ambush, had multiple people who were badly injured, and we had to create conditions for a quick reaction force to get there, get the people, try to issue what medical care they could, and still to defeat the forces that were a threat. That was the first time I remember being. It was also at night, under weather, in bad valleys, and everything was like danger close. And it was nerve wracking enough that I had my first experience of okay, you get home, debrief the mission, debrief intel, put the jet away, make sure that you've gotten some discussion with your team about what happened, and you're just going to go again tomorrow, right? And that was the first time I remember I started waking up and I had a dream about that, and it was very related to it. It was a very dramatic dream, and it started to become this image that was in my mind, and that dream just stayed with me for weeks. And I didn't have a language to talk about it. I maybe talked about it with the chaplain. I certainly didn't talk about it with any squadron leadership. But finally, after a while, the chaplain's like, "Dude, you're basically describing PTSD. You are like, I'm not trying to be dramatic with you, but you're having recurring dreams about the same thing. You were in an extreme intensity event. You were afraid for your life while you were doing things to other people. This is normal stuff." And then figuring out how to get on top of that, how to, develop some mental resiliency, how to talk to people that I do trust about it. All of that created conditions so that I think we started to figure out that that was becoming more and more real. And it was really, it was as we were dealing with vets that were coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan in the mid early 2000s that were really starting to kind of understand, hey, man, these guys aren't just, being little wussies that couldn't handle their combat experience. These are people that, either saw people doing things or had things done near them, or in the case of I had intel people, their job is to watch ISIS's videos. Can you imagine this, right? Uh, there is, even today, a couple of weeks ago, there was a report that came out from an open source intelligence analyst. He's not an intelligence agency analyst. He's just somebody who does this. And he says, I just gave up my job because I watched my 5,000th Russian or Ukrainian FPV drone kill. And he's like, at 5,000, I'm done. I can't watch any more of that. So I think that we got better over time at realizing that that's a real thing. By my first combat deployment, it was don't tell your wives where you're going, close off all communications with anybody you've ever known or loved, the Geneva Conventions, and we're going to go to war. And then we're going to have tea and medals after. By a couple of times later, we were starting to go like, oh man, I guess we should probably make sure that families understand the resources that are available to them. We should probably be planning some soft reintegrations and when people come home. We should probably be setting conditions for chaplains and mental health providers to be much more available and to initiate the conversation. Because if there's one thing that type A fighter pilots will never do, it's talk about how you're feeling. It just will not happen. So you need, you might participate in a conversation that starts with, hey, you guys mind if I just describe what's going on in some people's heads, some from those weak other squadrons, but I'd like to talk to you about it anyways, just so you know, like, and that then opens up the conversation. So I think that we knew enough to expect that stuff. And then again, part of our generation's thing, if I'm totally honest with you, in some ways, ISIS was additionally horrific because in Afghanistan, literally every sortie I came back from when we dropped the bomb, there would be a CIVCAS allegation. And in several cases, because we were sending MQ1s or MQ9s to go get bomb hit assessment after whatever we had done, we would actually see the Taliban either shoot or simply have a dead body from somewhere that they would lay in the crater of whatever we had done, and we would 100% know that they were going to call in a CIVCAS, whether there was a body or not. They were going to do that because they were going to do whatever they could to discredit coalition forces in Afghanistan. What was scarier to me about ISIS was they wouldn't. There were circumstances where we did kill civilians that were in the scene, and ISIS didn't make a complaint. They were a straight up death cult, and our intel guys would be showing you pictures of the central square in Raqqa where the picket fence around the central thing, which was itself a hanging gallows, was covered with heads that had been spiked onto the pickets. I mean, really horrific stuff. We had targets where we knew that there were legitimate military objectives. We knew that they were sitting those legitimate military objectives right next to a prison where civilians were being held. In the case of the one I'm thinking of, we ultimately decided the civilian casualties that we would inflict are just beyond where it would be worth us doing this attack. But I will tell you, months later, finding out what treatment those prisoners were getting, it really sits on your mind of would we have been doing them a favor if we hadn't have done it, right? So, I mean, all these things they work on your psyche, and I think that the big thing that has really changed over time is like my little cell phone. We have multiple threads that I keep with various people, and we still talk about like, hey man, this really sat on me wrong. Like this was a tough one. In the moment, I wanted people to understand better be tried by 12 than carried by 6. If in doubt, there is no doubt. I had a motto that I would have above the exit doors. You're walking out from, your step, you've got your mission, you're going out to the jets. And it was the mission of the squadron is to kill America's enemies with a clean conscience and a happy heart. And I said that because if something is sitting on you, excuse me, like you can't do that with a clear conscience and a happy heart, then I need your finger to come off the trigger button and I need you to come talk to me. Like we've got a bigger problem. Or if somebody's pushing you into a kill that you're just like, this is not right, we shouldn't be doing this, then dude, clean conscience and a happy heart. I'm not here to wreck you for the rest of your life because you felt like that had to be done. I became a really big believer, having done this for a little bit. It's almost sports psychology that your body knows a lot more than your mind can articulate. So in the moment, you may not be able to express exactly why you are like, oh man, I don't think we should do this. You may not be able to explain exactly why with the precision of language. But there are times where you feel the pit of your stomach drop, your hands get a little clammy, the hair on the back of your neck is up. And I'm like, I need you guys to listen to that. If that is happening, those are all your body perceiving that something about this kill is not clean. You need to not do this. And I wanted them to understand the difference between feeling that way about yourself, like I am scared for myself, and feeling that way about like what I'm about to do is and that's why we made the whole like there's two sayings. There's about other people and there's what I feel about myself. If it's about yourself, like I'm scared to do this, but they're defensive. I need you to work through that. But I'm scared to do this and I don't need to do this right now, then that's legit, man. I need you to listen to that and not do it.
Hmm.
And I think that as a culture, we're still getting better about figuring out how to use some of that to our advantage and how to train people to listen to their gut in a way that allows them to really key in on instincts that have been honed for a really long period of time. But when it got to like there were targets where you'd receive the pack and you're like, okay, this is apparently so important that this has a civcast acceptability. Like I know that there could be people in this scene. We always initially tried to get to civcast 0. I want to give you a little bit of background on that. We had kind of habituated that in Iraq and Afghanistan. And there were good reasons for it in Iraq for different reasons in Afghanistan. In Afghanistan, when General McChrystal was the commander of U.S. forces and also the commander of the International Security Assistance Force, ISAF, he had created policies in, I think, a very good-hearted and smart-minded effort to avoid creating the collateral impacts that would simply mean, one terrorist removed from the battlefield, but done in such a manner that 10 of his brothers, come into the battlefield. He was trying to avoid that. But we had habituated ourselves to this collateral civilian casualty value, the CVE of 0. And the problem was twofold. One, we had an adversary that is similar to what the Israelis face with some Hamas problems, which is you have an adversary that is blatantly using human shields. That's a really tough problem. And secondly, you have a very, very blurry definition of what is a militant versus what is a civilian. And that's complicated in its own right. So I think that what we always understood is that it was about teaching the squadron members to at least have a little bit of faith in the process. Like, hey guys, we do target development on these things, and this is a legitimate time-consuming effort. We spend substantial amounts of intelligence assets to soak these things to determine this is the characteristics of the human activities that are in this area. we know that there's bad guys there. Like, we're never going to ask you to attack something with like, maybe there's some bad guys there. I don't know. It's always going to be like, we know for a fact there is a positive military objective that'll be satisfied by us doing this. We are aware that there is an unwanted collateral effect of this, and that's why we would ask. They would get to, you know, I would never want to be the policy professional who's trying to go, well, boss, we think for a local tactical battlefield effect, we think the right number is 2. We think it's 2 civilians that are in the blast area of the weapon that were not the intended target, but they're going to be collaterally involved. Like, I would never want to be that person, but at the same time, I think that the coalition just by 2017 has started to, and really the end of my time in 2015, we were having to go there because we were seeing the adversary use human shields, embed in civilian populations, work in areas where they were explicitly keeping family members, and you just can't give the initiative to them because they are willing to get their family members in harm's way. So we had circumstances where guys would drop, and they did not see more than the appropriate number of unknown individuals in the field of regard. We 100% had circumstances where a door we had never seen before opens up, and 2 or 3 more people come out, or somebody who was having that cigarette underneath a tree that nobody observed comes into this, like, what are you going to do, right? If it happened really early in the weapons phase of flight and you could guide it away, maybe you were able to do something about it. But most of the time, it's right back to that kind of lawyer's thing of, hey guys, we asked you to prudently scan. We asked you to give it your best reasonable effort to make sure that we weren't going to exceed a civilian casualty. And then beyond that, ladies and gentlemen, it's orders to combat, right? It is, things will happen that you can't possibly have anticipated. And you are lucky when you work for a commander who's able to articulate that and defend that at the policy level. You are less lucky when you have people who are much more sensitive to the nightly news and to the dramatic and shocking images, and who allow an event or two to become the reason why they accuse their forces of becoming reckless or careless or something like that. So you always need your guys to operate at the highest possible level, to be as diligent as possible. And because they are so diligent, that will sometimes mean they come down and have a little bit of a breakdown in your office, because they will be the ones who say, I was doing everything possible, I didn't see that person under a tree, and because I didn't, and I did violate the policy, I feel absolutely wrecked. Oh my gosh, I feel like a killer. And you kind of have to be the one who brings them back to, hey man, I'm totally sympathetic, but we are doing dirty business, and we can all want 0 civilian casualties, but I looked at your tape. You did a reasonable scan to the limits of your technology, and that the targeting pod did not resolve that individual under a tree. I am satisfied that was not recklessness. That was bad luck. And you did a lot of that stuff with guys who, again, because the guys and gals who are, because they are holding themselves to such a high standard. And I hate to say it, but when you are in the cockpit of a fighter that is dropping bombs and slinging missiles, you are a fairly powerful human being. And you have been trained to operate with discipline and extreme levels of tactics. And you want to imagine that you have the ability to make the outcomes you want to happen, and to avoid the outcomes you don't want to happen. And so it's a little bit of the softer side of what a commander has to occasionally do, and flight commanders and directors of operations and others, to remind people that you are actually quite a fallible human who has been entrusted with an amazing arsenal of weaponry. And we expect you to operate as prudently and lawfully and thoughtfully as you can, but there will be circumstances well beyond your control. And if you can get people there, they usually develop a mental resilience that allows them to separate those 2 situations: what I wanted to happen and what actually happened. Okay, what I wanted to happen, I worked for it, I did all the right steps, I set conditions, it should have happened, it's what we expected, unfortunately, right? What you wind up having to come down a little bit harder on, because I did see this in 2014, 2015. I was the guy that reviewed almost every attack that was done in Operation Inherent Resolve. And you occasionally did see, hey, guy, sorry, you actually didn't do what was expected of you. And it was never like, it was never punitive, but it was usually, hey, your squadron may need to focus a little bit more training on making sure that you guys do this, because there's reasonable, there's less than reasonable, and then there's what I saw, and we need to fix that.
What sort of things would that be then? That's just not bothering to scan enough with the pod. It's not having the right field of view. What is it?
Yeah, no, it's generally something like that. In one case that strikes me particularly, it was a case of really bad communication. One aircraft was tasked to do a strike. We had what's called a squirter, so an intended object of attack has now left that area. They are unable to continue the attack because they're out of ordnance. We give them approval to coordinate with another aircraft, and we gave them approval with some specific constraints, like, hey, you need to communicate that the attack has to occur within this area, these geographic areas. It needs to occur within the next time frame, and they need to have scanned for these things. And in one case, it was that the next aircraft is coming on board. The pilot receives from the other aircraft a very cursory brief that doesn't include any of those restrictions, and basically gets a, here's your squirter, match pulse with me, go get this guy. And that guy had gone, it was beyond the time frame, out of the geographic area, and there were very obvious other collateral concerns in the field of view. And that was a case where we wound up having to, like, hey, we need to fix that. That was not what we expect. There are, I say that by way of just being honest. There are cases where people screw up, and you have to put that back in the box. And it was actually a point of pride that I think something that really makes me proud of the patch community generally, and the Air Force even more broadly, is that when it comes to the debrief, that's sacred time, and you're allowed to, hey guys, we didn't do it right today, and we have to fix this. And I want to get to why exactly we didn't do it right. And no, you're not going to write over your tape and just make the evidence of an error go away. We're actually going to deal with this. I essentially never saw, once somebody got told, hey, things went wrong, somebody not having the integrity of dealing with it. I occasionally saw, I don't think you realized how big of a problem that was, and let me put that into perspective for you, which then became a bit of an aha.
Yeah. As the squadron commander, then you're sort of the arbiter of what gets sort of pushed up the chain of command with regards to whether or not somebody did the things they were supposed to do, or didn't, or didn't do the things they were supposed to do.
Um, what I would say is, if you thought that somebody had really gone out of bounds, so the difference between 2014, 2015, where I was assessing weapons performance on behalf of the CAOC, and occasionally would see things that indicated real deviations from sound procedure, and then being a squadron commander where you want to make sure that people are doing their job. I never had a situation where I didn't have, like, it was never, as a squadron commander, me finding something on the tape that I shouldn't have found and bringing it up. It was always that an instructor, a flight commander, a flight lead would say, hey boss, I think we were, we had a civilian casualty limit of 2. We scanned, my guys are confident that they looked, but while we did the tape debrief, we saw 4. And I don't think it was recklessness. In fact, it was an unfortunate reality that the cathode ray tube screens that are in the jet don't have the visual definition that you will get on the debrief. You will see things on the high definition screen of the debrief that were recorded by the pod that you never saw in the cockpit, because the screen that you're receiving that information with doesn't have the fidelity to show it to you. So in a lot of cases, it was more of that latter case where guys were bringing stuff up. If we had thought something had really gone wrong, we absolutely would have raised it. I would have raised it with my wing leadership, and then from the wing leadership, I would have expected him to probably take that up with the CAOC director, or with the deputy commander of air, the DCFAC. I would expect, because we had really good relationships with our wing commanders and our DCFAC. And again, nobody was trying to fry people for errors, legitimately made errors that did not compound themselves and begin to indicate malaise, were typically the things that most good commanders are able to go, guys, tighten it back up. See you tomorrow. When they compounded into malaise, that became a really good reason for a squadron commander to ground somebody, occasionally send them home. I never had to do it, but I did see it done. And then I never personally saw things elevated into malice, but where somebody just wittingly does something absolutely wrong. But that's why you have a chain of command, to identify that and to stop it from occurring.
Maestro, I'm running short on time, but I wanted to ask you a little bit about the Strike Eagle sort of community today, then, and in particular around the sterling work they did out helping the Israelis repel the attack. What was it last
Yeah,
year from Iran? 70 or something drones down in one night.
amazing.
So do you have any insight into that? Do you know anybody who was involved in it? I mean, I wouldn't want to ask you to tell us somebody else's story. That's for them to tell.
Yeah,
But how difficult is that? You've shut down one one drone,
yeah.
but if you've got a sky full of drones, is that a feat? What is? I know that some DFCs were awarded
Yeah,
to those crews. So I'm not making any suggestions, but what I want to understand is that a difficult thing to do, to go out and shoot down 70 drones?
I think in the context of, you're still operating in contested airspace, you're still operating in bad areas over people who would absolutely do you harm. You are, when you think about the Distinguished Flying Cross, I think it's worth noting that people like Amelia Earhart and Charles Lindbergh got Distinguished Flying Crosses not necessarily for combat, but for extraordinary aerial achievement. It is not exclusively for, you did something that really required true grit and courage under fire. It is, you did something that was extraordinary in the field of aviation. And that is exactly what I think that was, which was, now we're going to take an ally that's in the middle of, an engagement where the Iranians absolutely could have inflicted more pain on the Israelis. I say this all by way of my Space Force connection. The January 2020 shot after Qasem Soleimani gets taken out by, U.S. forces, and the Iranians drop a couple of shots onto Assad Air Base using ballistic missiles. If that had resulted in the death of U.S. forces, the president would have lost wiggle room and would have been forced to counterattack and escalate. The fact that we were able to say, this is in that really first salvo of Iran directly attacking Israel, and we were able to use our capabilities to so blunt it on behalf of an ally that they didn't have the mass casualties and civilian losses that would have forced them to now do something really dramatic in counter escalation. That to me was an extraordinary aerial achievement, because those airmen were strategic. Because of that, the president, the prime minister of Israel, the Gulf coalition country, diplomatic efforts, they were all able to say, awful didn't occur. Let's all cool the temperature a little bit. Let's all step away from this. And it was extraordinary because I don't know when the last time a 12v70 engagement got planned out, right? Optimizing your radar for the low altitude search, darting around and splitting your forces so that you can cover multiple avenues of attack, prioritizing your weapons so that you're keeping arrows in reserve while taking easy shots on the easy kills and taking hard shots on the hard kills. That's a pretty substantial flight leadership accomplishment. I think they 100% deserve what they got. And I think that the bigger thing is when the president of the United States calls the squadron and says, thank you for doing what you did, because it allowed us to keep strategic and diplomatic efforts alive. You're like, that kind of deserves some recognition. I hats off to the Panthers and to the many other, Strike Eagles that were out there doing that. I think it's amazing. I wish we were a little bit further ahead in making low cost, high capacity munitions like Paco is working on with laser guided rockets and things like that, so that we can do that even more effectively. But I will tell you, man, the low cost cruise missile drone game is here to stay. It's going to continue to challenge airmen's perspective of what air superiority is. And we absolutely need to get ready for transitioning from dealing with that high-end exquisite Iranian F-14 to dealing with, dozens, if not hundreds, of low-cost cruise missiles coming at your, places you love and want to defend, and you need to knock that down fast. That's a nature of war doesn't change, character of war does. The character of air war is changing because of these low-cost air vehicles, and anybody who tries to diminish the courage of the airmen because they weren't like turning and burning with a MiG or something like that. I just stay up to date, man. This is that is just as real of a way of reasserting air superiority as anything that would have involved like a more macho expression of air combat.
Do you think so? So two questions. Well, one observation, then and a question. But so I think APKWS has been photographed on Strike Eagles with OT tail codes or ET tail codes. So I think Eglin is testing them now. Um, do you think that that is an interim measure? I mean, I get the feeling, the sense that actually the answer to the problem isn't Strike Eagles or F-16s firing, AKPWSs. You can probably only do one at a time, but probably there needs to be a different solution set to that particular problem. So the question really is, do you think that dare I say it, manned aircraft have are going to have a part to play in that solution? And is this a electromagnetic warfare question actually, where it's going to be about jamming, it's going to be about interfering with these drones en masse rather than trying to individually kinetically target them?
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair question. I'm working the counter drone. I work adjacent to the counter drone problem at Air Combat Command right now, and they're working multiple lines of effort because the answer is yes. You have to defeat electromagnetics. You have to defeat the actual electronics themselves. Um, we're seeing out of the Ukraine, first it was 10-kilometer fiber optic guided shots. Then it was 21-kilometer. And we just saw 42-kilometer, which means you can't just jam away their command and control links. You can't just jam away their signals. You can't just degrade GPS because they can navigate using optical means.
Mm.
This is a hard problem. I think it's the democratization of air power. Just like, excuse me, low-cost space launch is causing a democratization of what's going on in space. You can get all kinds of things up there. I think microelectronics and good battery technology, good low-cost sensors, inertial navigation units, webcams that can do terrain navigation following activities. Excuse me. We're going to continue to see how air power presents itself, democratized to smaller and smaller form factors. And I don't think the man fighter is going away anytime soon, but I think that we better get ready to dispense whole new coveys of ordnance. And I think we better get ready to say we can protect this portion of air power below 5,000 feet, within 15 miles, with a much lower cost, autonomous counter drone drones, right?
Mm.
We have to do that because I will say, I think spending AIM-9Xs and AMRAAMs as a one-time defense of Israel in a strategic context is worth it. You can build Shahed drones way faster than I can crank up the Raytheon production line. We have to get on the front side of that production curve.
That's very interesting. I didn't know that you were still working in that domain. So that's very interesting too. Okay, I think that's probably a good place at which to say, Maestro, thank you so much for joining us and for giving us a very different perspective on the same events that Stinger came and talked to us about from a sort of more cockpit-driven perspective a couple of years ago. It's really, really interesting to hear about how the planning comes about, the different things that you have to consider, the way it works, how you have to flex and be adaptive. And I've learned a lot. So, and I'm sure the audience at home has too. So thank you for joining us. I appreciate your time. And I will have to get you back. It might be a short episode, but I will have to get you back to talk about Space Force.
I'd like that, Steve. Thanks very much.
Cheers, Maestro.